Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up over 2 hours of real-life Reddit stories for you to relax with, whether you're here to unwind, fall asleep, or just have something on in the background. And some of these stories get pretty wild. They're mostly about drama, revenge, and some downright crazy stories from everyday life. Also, I'm trying to post these videos daily, so if you're enjoying them, feel free to subscribe. But anyways, get comfortable and enjoy the stories. Along with some chill gameplay I got today where I improved my villager trading hall, have a near-death experience, and explore for resources. This first story is about a man who won millions in the lottery, only to have his plans for the money create unexpected conflict in his personal life. Not long ago, I hit the kind of jackpot most people only dream about. I won enough money to completely change the lives of myself and my family. Millions of dollars. Even now, it still feels surreal just to say that out loud. I'm not going to give an exact number, but trust me, it's the kind of win that makes your stomach flip and your hands shake when you first hear the news. The moment I realized what had happened, my mind started racing. My parents were the first people I called, and right after them, the next person I reached out to wasn't my current partner. It was my ex-wife. She's the mother of my kids, and even though we've been divorced for about 6 years now, she's one of the kindest, most decent people I've ever known. Our marriage didn't end because of her. It ended because I messed up. I was in a bad place at the time and had an affair with the woman I'm with now. That choice blew everything apart. My ex was devastated, and I knew I had broken her heart. But despite how much she was hurting, she handled the divorce with a level of grace I didn't deserve. She made sure things stayed as pain-free as possible for our kids, who mean the absolute world to me. She never tried to poison them against me. She even stayed in touch with my parents, who still think the world of her. And while she and my current girlfriend refuse to even speak to one another, she has always remained respectful toward me. So when I got this life-changing news, I couldn't help but think of her too. She works a low-paying job at a public library, the kind where you pour your heart into the community, but the paycheck barely covers the basics. I knew right away that I wanted to share some of the winnings with her. Not out of romance, not because I'm in love with her again, but because she is the mother of my children, and because she has been nothing but strong, kind, and fair, even when I gave her every reason not to be. I still love her in the sense that I'll always care for her. I wanted her to have the freedom to enjoy life, to pursue her hobbies, and to give our kids even more stability when they're with her. When I told my parents about this plan, they immediately agreed. They know how incredible she's been, and they were fully supportive. Even my lawyer, who was definitely surprised by the idea, said he would help make it happen. But when I brought it up to my current girlfriend, everything blew up. She was furious. She accused me of disrespecting her and screamed that this meant I must still be in love with my ex-wife. No matter how I explained it, no matter how clear I made it that this was about co-parenting and gratitude, she wasn't hearing it. She told me I was choosing my ex over her. And in her anger, she even threatened to leave me. And the strange thing is, when she said that, I didn't feel fear or sadness. I felt a wave of relief. After years of tension between her and my ex, and after watching how she reacted to me trying to do something kind, I realized I wasn't going to change my mind. I'm still going to give my ex a significant portion of the winnings. She's earned that much respect from me, and no amount of yelling is going to change that. So here I am, sitting with millions of dollars in the bank, my current relationship hanging by a thread, and my decision already made. Maybe people will think I'm crazy, but I know in my heart I'm doing the right thing for the person who's always done right by me and my kids. That's where the story ends. This one really hit me with how complicated relationships can get once money's involved. What stood out most was how quickly the girlfriend made it all about herself, instead of seeing the bigger picture. I think it says a lot that his parents and even his lawyer were supportive, but she instantly saw it as a threat. The way he described feeling relief at the idea of her leaving, that part really jumped out. It almost sounded like the money just pulled the curtain back on something that was already broken. This next story is about a manager who unexpectedly came face to face with their old high school bully during a job interview and had to decide how to handle it after all these years. I work for a pretty large company in the tech industry. I've been here for about 5 years now, and I've worked my way up to a fairly high-level management role. Recently, I got pulled into helping build out a brand new team within the company. That meant I had to sit in on multiple interviews and give feedback about the candidates. It wasn't really part of my usual responsibilities, and honestly, it all came together pretty last minute. My only task was to do the interviews, give my impressions, and pass along my notes so the rest of the hiring process could move forward. Now, the company has only just gone back to doing in-person interviews again, so the whole setup already felt kind of clunky and unfamiliar. When I first looked over the list of candidates I'd be meeting that day, I scanned through the names without much thought, but then one name jumped out at me. Brad. I froze for a second because I knew that name. It had been over 15 years since I last saw him, but there was no way I could forget the face of the guy who made my high school years absolutely miserable. Back then, Brad was your stereotypical jock. I was the overweight theater kid who happened to be good at AP math and science classes. You can probably picture the dynamic already. He was cruel. Those were some of the hardest years of my life, and Brad was one of the main reasons why. So seeing his name on that list of candidates for a position in my company of all places was like being yanked straight back into those painful memories. At first, I convinced myself it couldn't possibly be the same person. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But when Brad walked into the interview room, my stomach dropped. It was him. There was no mistaking it. I was suddenly face to face with the same guy who used to torment me. Except this time, I was the one across the table holding the clipboard. At first, Brad didn't seem to recognize me. He sat down, looked around the room casually, and started answering questions like, normal. But a few minutes into the conversation, his expression shifted. It clicked for him who I was. The recognition in his eyes was unmistakable. And then, instead of saying anything meaningful, he tried to act like we were old buddies. He gave me this fake, friendly smile and said things like, "Man, it's been forever, huh? Remember those days?" He tried to rewrite the past right there in the room, like we'd been friends in high school instead of him being the guy who bullied me relentlessly. I played along. I didn't call him out. I just smiled politely and kept the interview moving forward. His performance as a candidate wasn't terrible, but it wasn't anything special either. Honestly, he was middle of the pack at best. He didn't stand out for his skills, his experience, or his answers. Toward the end of the interview, he even tried to joke with me, saying something along the lines of, "You'll put in a good word for me, right? Old friends and all." I laughed it off in the moment, but inside, it rubbed me the wrong way. When I went to finalize my interview notes, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It had been 15 years since high school. I've changed so much as a person since then. I've worked hard, built a career, and become someone I'm proud of. But somehow, sitting across from Brad pulled me right back to those years of being humiliated, mocked, and made to feel small. That feeling lingered, and I'll admit, it influenced what I did next. I wrote up my feedback on Brad, and I didn't hold back. I downplayed the good points he had and exaggerated the flaws I saw. I also noted in my report that he tried to coerce me into giving him a good review by playing on the fact that we knew each other from high school. Maybe I could have just been professional and neutral, but in that moment, I didn't want to. After everything, I let those old memories guide my hand. Now, I'm sitting here unsure of how to feel about it. On one hand, I told myself I was just being honest about him as a candidate. On the other, I can't deny that part of me was acting out of spite, even after all these years. It's strange how quickly someone from your past can pull you back into who you used to be, no matter how much you've grown since then. That's the end of this story. That's such a wild situation. Imagine being the one in power after all those years, and suddenly the tables have turned. It's kind of surreal how the past can catch up with you in ways you'd never expect. I can see why those old feelings bubbled back up, because stuff from high school sticks with you more than we'd like to admit. Honestly, I don't even know what I would have done in that position, but it's one of those moments that really makes you think about how far you've come. This next story is about a sister who crossed the line by testing her siblings' relationship, creating a clash between family loyalty and personal boundaries. I've been dating my boyfriend for almost 2 years now. He's calm, respectful, and one of those people who seems easygoing at first, but actually has firm boundaries. That's something I've always admired about him, because it makes me feel safe knowing he won't let people take advantage of him. Recently, my younger sister Elle went through a rough breakup and asked if she could stay with us for a while. She's 20, and growing up, she and I had a complicated relationship. She's always been the gorgeous, outgoing one, the type who easily draws attention in any room. To give you an idea, I spent a lot of my childhood feeling like I was living in her shadow, And the truth is, she never minded rubbing that in. Even now, it feels like she has this need to compete with me. Like she wants to prove she can take anything I have. Still, when she asked to stay, I said yes, as long as she respected our space and treated it as temporary. But within the first week, she started acting way too flirty with my boyfriend. It wasn't direct flirting, but little things that made me uncomfortable. She'd call him Mr. Perfect, touch his arm during conversations, walk around in tiny clothes, and do exaggerated moves like bending down right in front of him. He told me it made him uncomfortable too, but he didn't want me to think he was accusing her of anything. I tried to handle it gently, so I pulled her aside and brought it up. Her reaction was defensive right away. She snapped that I was being paranoid and reminded me she was my sister, not some homewrecker. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but then 2 nights ago, everything came to a head. I came home late to find my boyfriend looking completely shaken. He told me Elle had walked into the living room wearing just a towel, sat next to him and asked if he was ever curious, what it would be like to be with someone more fun. He shut it down right away, got up, and locked himself in our room. When I confronted her, she smirked like it was some kind of joke. She actually said I should be thanking her, because she was testing him, and now I knew he was loyal. That was it for me. I snapped and told her to pack her stuff and leave. She started yelling about how I was choosing a guy over my own sister, but I didn't back down. She stormed out. After that, she called our mom, who called me to say I was being harsh because Elle had nowhere else to go. My dad, on the other hand, was furious at her. My brother even called her a snake. Some cousins say I should forgive her because family forgives, but I can't get past what she did. Now Elle is texting me saying she's sleeping in her car, and that if anything happens to her, it's on me. I don't buy that because I know she has friends she could stay with. It feels like another guilt trip. My boyfriend has been completely supportive, but I'm left feeling sad, angry, and guilty all at once. That's the end of this story. Wow, that was messy. The way she brushed it off as a test really says a lot, and not in a good way. What stood out to me most was how calm and steady the boyfriend stayed through all of it. He didn't waver for a second. I think the hardest part here is that mix of emotions afterward, where you're doing the right thing but it still feels heavy. It's the kind of drama that really shakes up how you see family, even when you know you made the right call. This next story is about a do-it-yourself toilet repair that went so wrong it ended with police at the door. I'm definitely not a plumber, but my toilet had been running nonstop for weeks, and I was tired of having to jiggle the handle every single time like some kind of caveman. I finally decided it was time to be a responsible adult and fix it myself. So I did what anyone would do. I watched exactly one YouTube tutorial. The guy in the video said it was probably the flapper causing the problem. Sounded simple enough. I went to the store, grabbed what looked like the right part, it wasn't, and came back ready to repair it. At first I felt kind of proud, like, look at me being handy. But within minutes the whole thing spiraled. The tank lid was on the floor, water started splashing everywhere, and at one point I even dropped a wrench right into the bowl. To make it worse, I twisted the wrong valve, and the pipe behind the toilet made this massive banging noise. It sounded like someone kicked the wall, and I jumped so hard I smacked my head on the sink. Of course, all that noise got my upstairs neighbor's attention. He started stomping around and then came down to bang on my door, yelling, "Are you okay?" I yelled back, "Yeah, just fixing the toilet." Apparently, what he heard was fixing to blow it up. 2 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. This time, it was actual police officers. I opened the door soaking wet, holding a cracked tank lid in one hand and a plunger in the other. One cop actually laughed when he saw me standing there, dripping water like a sad cartoon character. The other one asked if I was building some kind of pressure bomb. I just shook my head and explained that I was only trying to stop the toilet from running. They stepped inside, took a quick look around, and clearly saw there was no bomb. Just me, a half-destroyed toilet, and enough water on the floor to qualify as a minor flood. After that, they left, probably with a story they'd tell their coworkers later. The kicker? The toilet still runs. And now my neighbor won't even make eye contact when we pass in the hall. That story wraps up here. That one cracked me up. The way fixing the toilet turned into fixing to blow it up is just too perfect. I can only imagine the cops trying to keep a straight face when the cop walked in and saw that scene. And honestly, it's kind of relatable. trying to fix something simple, only to end up in way deeper than expected. The fact that the toilet still runs after all that just seals it. This next story is about a longtime customer who suddenly crossed boundaries, showing up at a woman's home and leaving her terrified for her safety. I'm 27 and I work in the cannabis industry. For more than 4 years, I've had this same customer. Every time it was simple. He'd come in, buy his pre-roll, and leave. No small talk, no drama, nothing strange. He's a little younger than me, doesn't have a car, still lives with his mom, and usually just walks everywhere. Honestly, I never thought twice about him. But last Thursday changed that. He came in like normal, grabbed his usual, and left. Then 5 minutes later, he walked back inside and asked, "Do you mind if I sit down? It's just really hot out there." The heat index that day was over 100 degrees. One of those suffocating summer afternoons where even standing outside feels brutal. And here he was, oddly enough, wearing a jacket. I didn't want to be rude, so I said, sure. I even gave him a drink and told him to rest until he felt ready to head back out. At first it seemed harmless. He sat there for about an hour, rambling about random topics, the economy, Ozzy Osbourne's death, things going on in his life. But then the conversation shifted. He started talking about wanting to find a girl, someone to take to the fair, go hiking with, spend time with. That's when the alarm bells went off in my head. I tried to make things clear. I told him I was working on myself, that I was going back to school, spending time at the gym, and really focusing on my own goals. I even suggested dating apps like Hinge or Tinder if he wanted to find someone, because those had worked for me before. After that, I politely wrapped things up by saying, well, it's been nice talking, but I have to use the restroom. He took the hint, but before leaving, he turned to me and asked if I was working that Saturday. When I told him no, he asked me to the fair. I told him, no, I'm sorry, I already have plans. That was the end of it, or at least I thought it was. Fast forward to Sunday night around 9:30. I was doing laundry, just sitting on the couch, when I suddenly heard my doorbell ring. That was odd. In my condos, people usually use the back door by the parking lot. The front doorbell ringing was unusual, but I figured maybe someone had food delivered to the wrong address. I tossed in another load of laundry and hopped into the shower, not thinking much about it. But while I was in the shower, it started. Loud, insistent pounding on my front door. Over and over, someone slamming their fists against it. At first, I ignored it. I wasn't about to get out of the shower dripping wet to answer the door. But when I got out, it escalated. The doorbell was going non-stop. Ding, 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 followed by pounding, then more dinging. It was relentless. I started freaking out. I grabbed my phone and called my mom while it was still happening. She could hear the noise through the line. That's how loud it was. My dog was barking his head off, completely panicked. At that point, I peeked out through the blinds of my spare bedroom, and my stomach dropped. It was him, my customer, the same one I'd rejected just 2 days earlier. He had been at my door for about 20 minutes by then, pounding and ringing the bell, refusing to leave. I don't even know how he figured out where I live. Maybe he saw me walking my dog around the neighborhood. Maybe he followed me home from work. I have no idea, but the fact that he showed up out of nowhere was terrifying. I texted my neighbor, someone I'm really close with, almost like a second mom, and she came over immediately. We stayed by the back door, listening to the racket from the front. I was shaking from head to toe, completely disoriented, because none of it made sense. Why was he here? What did he want? My neighbor ended up calling the cops for me, because by that point, I was too scared to think straight. Within 5 minutes, squad cars arrived. From the time the pounding stopped to the time the first officer pulled up, maybe 3 minutes had passed. He must have bolted as soon as he spotted them. I gave my statement to the police, told them about what had happened on Thursday, and explained how he'd been at my door for half an hour. They sent more cars to patrol the neighborhood. The thing is, after all these years of him being a customer, I don't even know his name. I have no clue who this guy actually is. And that's what makes it so much worse. How long has he known where I live? How long has he been keeping an eye on me? What was his plan that night? Did he want to scare me? Hurt me? Or worse? I don't know, and not knowing is terrifying. I couldn't stay in my place after that. I ended up calling a friend and crashing at her house. But even then, I felt sick. I live alone with my dog, and I don't want to move. But how do I feel safe going back when I know this guy was just outside, pounding on my door for 30 minutes? It's 3 in the morning as I'm writing this, and I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm shaking and combing through everything: transaction records, security footage, anything that might help the police track him down. He once told me he got fired from JCPenney, but I doubt that will be enough to identify him. All I did was politely decline a date, and now my entire sense of safety feels shattered. I wanted to stay at my job until I was ready to move on, but now I'm wondering if I need to quit immediately, maybe even move, just to protect myself. Right now, I can't stop crying. I feel like I can't trust anyone, no matter how harmless they seem. I don't know what to do. I just wanted to live a normal life, focus on my goals, and not feel threatened for saying no. Instead, I feel like my entire world has been flipped upside down. That's the end of this story. That one was tough to sit with. The pacing of it, from casual work conversations to a nightmare at her front door, really shows how fast things can turn. The part that stood out most to me was just how relentless the pounding and doorbell ringing was. I could almost hear it while reading. What also surprised me was how little she knew about him after years of seeing him, which makes the whole situation feel even scarier. It's a heavy one, and it left me with that uneasy feeling of how close danger can sometimes feel to home. This next story is about a barista who quietly helped a regular customer for months, only to have them suddenly disappear without a trace. I'm 21, and I work at this little independent coffee shop. It's not a fancy place by any means, just a cozy corner cafe where people drift in before work or school to grab their caffeine and maybe a pastry. I've been there long enough now that I recognize most of the regulars by sight. Some people I know by name, some just by their orders, and a few I recognize by the way they walk in and head straight to the counter without even glancing at the menu. About 6 months ago, one person in particular started showing up almost every morning. They had a routine that never seemed to change. They'd order the same thing every time: a medium cappuccino and occasionally a croissant if they looked especially tired that day. They weren't the kind of customer who lingered for small talk. Usually just a quiet smile, a polite thank you, and a tip dropped into the jar before they walked out. At first I didn't think much of it, just another regular. But then there was this morning that changed how I saw them. They slid their card across the counter, and when I ran it, the screen popped up with declined. Their face went red instantly. You could tell they were embarrassed. They mumbled something about transferring money later and started backing away, like they couldn't get out fast enough. I don't even know why I did it, but without thinking I said, "It's fine, just take it." I pushed the cup toward them like it was no big deal. The look on their face when I said that, it was like I'd just taken a 100-pound weight off their shoulders. They thanked me over and over, clutching the cup like it was something precious, and then they left. The very next day, they came back. They walked straight up to the counter, cappuccino order ready as always, and tried to hand me double the money. I waved it off and told them not to worry about it. After that, it just became this unspoken habit. Some days they'd pay like normal. Other days I'd forget to ring it up or just slide the cup over without even mentioning the total. It wasn't some grand gesture. It just felt good, seeing them relax a little, knowing maybe I made their morning easier. It wasn't about flirting or anything like that. I didn't have some secret crush. I just liked helping. Life is hard enough as it is, and in my head, a cappuccino here or there wasn't going to bankrupt the shop. If anything, it made me feel better to do something small that clearly meant a lot to them. Here's the part I'm embarrassed to admit. For 6 whole months, I never once asked their name. Not once. I knew their face, their order, even the way they'd sometimes fidget with their keys while waiting. We'd talk casually about the weather, or about how long their work shifts had been. But when it came to actually knowing who they were, I had nothing. At some point, it got too late to ask. It felt weird to suddenly go, "By the way, what's your name?" when we'd been doing this routine for half a year. Then last week, they just stopped showing up. One morning, I realized it was later than usual and they hadn't walked through the door. The next day, still nothing. And then the whole week passed with no sign of them. No cappuccino order. No polite smile. No quick nod as they headed back out into the world. I don't know if they moved away, changed jobs, or just found another cafe. Maybe something completely different happened. But I didn't realize how much I'd grown attached to the routine until it broke. Now every morning feels a little off. I keep glancing at the door, half expecting them to appear again. And when it stays quiet, there's this small emptiness I can't shake. The thing that keeps nagging at me is that I'll never know. I'll never know their name. I'll never know where they went or why they stopped coming. It's like for 6 months, I gave free coffee to a ghost. Someone who walked into my life, became a part of my mornings, and then disappeared like they were never there. I don't regret it. I'd still do it again. But I can't help feeling a little foolish for never making it past small talk, and now being left with nothing but the memory of someone I never truly got to know. That's where the story ends. That one left me with such a quiet, bittersweet feeling. What stuck with me most was how much comfort can grow out of the smallest routines, even when you don't notice it at the time. It's interesting how something as simple as a cappuccino can turn into this anchor in someone's day. And I get how awkward it feels when it's too late to ask someone's name, even though it shouldn't be. What really surprised me was how quickly that absence left such a gap. It shows how these little connections can matter more than we realize. This next story is about a long-standing family conflict, where a sister suddenly decided she wanted to reclaim the child her sibling had raised for 8 years. I'm 35, and I've been married to my husband, who's 38, for almost a decade now. Our marriage has always been filled with love and support, but for a long time there was this aching emptiness we couldn't ignore. We couldn't seem to have children, no matter how hard we tried. Month after month, year after year, it was one disappointment after another. We held on to hope, but it never seemed to come true for us. Then, a few years back, something unexpected happened. My sister got pregnant. The father was never in the picture, and she wasn't prepared for motherhood at all. She came to us, vulnerable and scared, asking if we could help. More specifically, she asked us to cover all the hospital bills and to take in the baby once he was born. It was an enormous decision, but for us, the answer was instant. We wanted to be parents more than anything, and here was a chance to love a child who needed us. We paid for everything, from the doctor's appointments to the hospital stay to the paperwork afterward. When the baby was born, he was registered under our last name. From day one, we didn't see him as just my sister's child. He became our son in every way that mattered. Raising him felt natural. We gave him our full love, our patience, and our guidance. We told him the truth when he was old enough to understand that biologically his mom was my sister, but he never once wavered in how he saw us. He only ever recognized us as his parents. To him, my husband and I were mom and dad. Nothing more, nothing less. Years passed, and eventually, after so much waiting, my husband and I were blessed with a child of our own. It felt like a miracle. We had our son, who was now 8, and a little daughter, who is now 4. Our family felt complete, filled with both the boy we raised as our firstborn and the daughter we had long prayed for. But that's when everything shifted. Out of nowhere, my sister began making comments. At first, they were small. Things like, well, now that you've got one of your own, or I should be spending more time with him. But then she became more direct. She started saying she wanted to take him back. Her reasoning that we already have our own child now, as if the years we spent raising him suddenly didn't matter. It felt like a knife to the heart. I never once kept her from visiting him. She has always been welcome in our home. I never tried to erase her or keep her from seeing him, but the reality is she rarely showed up, and when she did, there was never much gratitude. It was like she assumed we'd shoulder all the responsibility without her needing to give anything back. Now she feels entitled to just walk in and take him away, as if parenthood is something you can claim or unclaim whenever it's convenient. I can't even describe how painful it is to hear those words from her. He is my son. He calls me mom. He knows my husband as dad. We've been the ones to tuck him in at night, to kiss his scrapes when he fell, to celebrate his birthdays, to help him with school projects, to guide him through life. I can't imagine handing him over. To me, he isn't borrowed. He isn't on loan. He is mine in every way that counts. The idea of losing him, after 8 years of being his mother, feels unthinkable. And here's the part that adds another layer. Legally, he is ours. His birth certificate carries our last name. We are listed as the legal parents. We even have a signed agreement from my sister giving us full guardianship. It's not just an emotional bond. It's backed by the law. That's why her sudden demands feel not only unfair, but almost surreal. Still, it's tearing me apart. I've poured every ounce of myself into being his mother, and I don't want to lose him to someone who didn't step up when he needed her the most. I'm caught between the weight of family loyalty and the undeniable truth that my son is my son. He's 8 years old now. He's lived his whole life with us, and I will fight to keep him here, with the family he's always known. That's where the story ends. That one really pulled me in. What hit me most was how deeply she described raising him, the little details of being there through everything, and how those years can't just be erased. It also stood out how the sister framed it, like having a biological child somehow changed the bond she had already formed. The whole situation feels messy, but the love for that boy came through so strongly. And the legal side makes it even more complicated, though it sounds like the parents here have a solid foundation. It left me thinking about how family dynamics can twist when people view responsibility so differently. This next story is about a woman who discovered she was excluded from a close friend's wedding trip, leaving her questioning 2 decades of friendship. I've been part of the same friendship group since I was 13 years old. Now I'm almost 33, which means I've shared nearly 20 years of memories with these women. There are 7 of us in total, and while some of us are closer to each other than others, we've always kept a group chat going. For me, they weren't just casual friends. I always thought of them as the kind of people who would be in my life forever. The friends you assume will still be there decades down the road. That's why this weekend hit me so hard. I was scrolling through Instagram when I suddenly saw photos from a Hen Do, a bachelorette trip, for one of the girls in our group. 5 of them had gone away together for a long weekend. The only people not there were me and one other friend, and she has 2 kids, so I assumed she couldn't make it. But me? I hadn't even known it was happening. I hadn't been invited, hadn't been given a heads up, hadn't even heard it mentioned once. The whole thing was planned behind my back. To be fair, I know I haven't been the most active in the group chat these past few years. I've been doing a PhD, and a while back I even told them I'd be less present for a while because my schedule was intense. But even so, I always made an effort when it counted. I traveled across the country for everyone's 30th birthdays. I sent messages, stayed supportive, and tried to be there for big moments. Maybe not every little chat, but definitely the milestones. What really hurts isn't just that I missed the Hen Do, it's the silence. No one said a word. Not one person messaged me to say, "Hey, just so you know, this is happening." No one gave me a chance to understand or ask questions. They just went ahead with it and then carried on like everything was completely normal. After I found out, I reached out to 2 of the girls I'm closest to. They were shocked. They admitted they thought I had been included, and they seemed genuinely confused by the bride's decision. Both of them said there hadn't been any issues or falling out, nothing I had done to upset anyone. They were really upset to see how hurt I was, and I believed them. When I told them I was thinking about leaving the group chat altogether, unfollowing everyone and cutting ties quietly, they got emotional. They told me they didn't want me to go, that it would feel extreme, that it wasn't fair to lose me over this. They didn't want to be the reason our 20-year friendship circle broke apart. But honestly, I don't know what else to do. I feel humiliated, like a spare part in a group I thought I still belonged to. For so long, I believed I had a place with them. But now it feels like that trust has been shattered. Part of me wants to step away, not out of anger, but simply to protect myself, to give myself some closure and dignity instead of pretending nothing happened. At the same time, I'm scared. I don't want to look like I'm being dramatic or like I'm punishing them, and I don't know if, down the line, I'll regret cutting myself off from 20 years of history. Another part of me wonders if maybe I should just distance myself from the bride, since it seems like she was the one who made the final decision not to include me. Right now, I feel stuck between holding on to a group I thought was forever and letting go of something that clearly doesn't feel the same anymore. That story wraps up here. That one really left me thinking. What stood out most was how she's still sitting in that space of not knowing whether to stay or step away. And that uncertainty felt so raw. The silence from the group seemed even more painful than missing the trip itself, and it's easy to see why that would break trust. I also found it surprising that her closest friends were just as confused, because it shows how uneven the planning really was. It's a tough spot, trying to weigh 20 years of history against how things feel right now. This next story is about a customer who caught a waitress adding extra charges to their order, only to later find out she was fired for it. There's this restaurant I go to all the time, mostly just for one thing, their pulled pork sandwich. It's my go-to order, and I always get it to go. Over time, I've practically memorized the price. With taxes, fees, and all those new charges they tack on, it always comes to $17.55. I know this because I've checked my bank statements after multiple visits. I order it about twice a month, and it's never changed. But just recently, something felt off. I called in my usual order, nothing special, and when I checked my bank statement afterward, the charge wasn't what it should have been. Instead of $17.55, I saw $29.20. I froze for a second, double-checked the line item, and realized it really was for that one pulled pork sandwich. That's when I made a mental note to bring it up when I went to pick it up. When I walked in, the first thing I did was ask for a receipt. The waitress looked uncomfortable and told me there was something wrong with the machine, like it wasn't printing properly. That didn't sit right with me, so I asked if I could speak with the manager about the sandwich pricing. She hesitated and then said the manager wouldn't be in until 4. To avoid further confrontation, she quickly told me she would just void the whole thing out of the system. Basically, she gave me the sandwich for free. I accepted it and left, but in my head, I was unsettled. On one hand, I'd just gotten a free meal, but on the other, it felt shady. So I decided I'd come back later to speak to the manager and get some clarity. Later that day, I returned and finally sat down with the manager. I explained what had happened and asked if there had been a mistake with their pricing. She pulled up my order from earlier and confirmed that the receipts were working perfectly fine. What she found instead was that the waitress had added an excessive tip on top of my order. That's where the extra charge had come from. Hearing that explained everything. I hadn't authorized any tip, let alone one that doubled the cost of my sandwich. The manager refunded me right away. I didn't make a big scene about it because I genuinely just wanted to understand the pricing. I had even wondered if they had raised the takeout fee, since at the time it was already at 10%. But once I knew the truth, I was satisfied with the refund and thought that would be the end of it. Then, when I went back to the restaurant again, I learned that the waitress had been fired right after that incident. I couldn't help but think about it. She was clearly young, maybe 25 at most, and she was pregnant. I couldn't shake the question in my mind. Should I have just accepted the free sandwich that day and walked away, instead of pursuing it further with the manager? That's the end of this story. That one made me pause a bit. What struck me was how quickly it escalated from a small refund question to someone losing their job. The detail about her being pregnant added another layer that makes it sit heavier, even if the mistake was on her. I also found it interesting that the storyteller wasn't even upset at first. They just wanted clarity on the pricing. And honestly, it's one of those situations that leaves you thinking about how one small decision can ripple into something bigger than expected. This next story is about a tenant whose landlord gave unauthorized access to someone, leading to theft and a fight over rent and late fees. I live in Louisiana, and recently I went through a situation with my landlord that left me both shaken and angry. It wasn't just about money. It was about my safety, my privacy, and feeling like the one person who should be protecting my rights as a tenant completely disregarded them. Here's what happened. My landlord allowed someone into my apartment without ever asking me. I didn't know about it until after the fact, and when I found out, I realized that money had been stolen from me. Imagine walking into your own place, your own safe space, only to realize someone had been there without your knowledge and taken from you. That's exactly what I had to deal with. I tried to handle it as calmly as I could. I reached out to my landlord, explained the situation, and asked if she could give me some flexibility with rent this month. After all, I had just been robbed because of her decision. I thought it was reasonable to expect at least a little compassion, or even just acknowledgement of what happened. But instead, she doubled down. She told me in no uncertain terms that rent is due by the 10th of the month. If I miss that deadline, I'll be charged $10 for every single day it's late. No exceptions, no flexibility. It was like she completely brushed aside the fact that she had allowed someone into my home in the first place. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like a violation of my rights. She gave access to my apartment without my permission, and I ended up paying the price for it, literally. I was robbed, and now she's refusing to acknowledge her part in it. To make it worse, this wasn't even the first time. A while back, she let the same person into my apartment while I was asleep inside. When I woke up and realized it, I told her very clearly that he wasn't allowed in my home without my permission. I thought that was the end of it, that she'd respect my boundary, but apparently not. Here's the twist. The person she let in wasn't just some random stranger. It was someone I had been dating, but he never lived with me, and he wasn't on my lease. That doesn't matter though. She still had no right to give him access to my home. She handed over a key and let him in unsupervised, without even bothering to call or text me first. Now I'm stuck trying to figure out my options. I've documented everything: texts, details, dates, because I know if I ever need to pursue legal action, I'll need proof. But I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know exactly what my legal standing is here. Do I have grounds to fight this? Can I hold her accountable for giving out access without my permission? Or am I just stuck paying rent on time while trying to recover from what happened? The whole situation has left me rattled. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore, and I don't feel like I can trust the person who's supposed to manage the property. And yet, here I am, still being told that if I don't pay up by the 10th, those late fees are coming my way. That's where the story ends. That one really stood out to me. What hit the hardest was the idea of someone being let into your home without permission. That's such a basic boundary, and once it's crossed, it's hard to feel safe again. It was also surprising how the landlord brushed everything aside and immediately went back to talking about late fees, almost like none of the bigger issues mattered. The detail about this happening before, while she was asleep, made it feel even more unsettling. Honestly, the whole situation just left me shaking my head at how badly it was handled. This next story is about a job interview that took a strange turn when the candidate overheard a sales guy bragging about dumping all the hard work on him. Back in the early 2000s, around 2001, I interviewed with a startup company that was trying to get itself off the ground. The job sounded demanding but straightforward. I'd be flying out to customer sites, installing equipment, staying just long enough to make sure everything was running smoothly, and then flying back home. The schedule was set up so I'd leave on Mondays, work through the week, and be back by Friday. It wasn't glamorous, but it seemed like an opportunity to get in early with a growing company. The interview itself actually went really well. I felt confident about my answers, and the people in the room seemed satisfied with my experience. When we wrapped up, they asked me to step out for a few minutes while they discussed things internally. I walked down the hall and ended up in their break room. To call it a break room was generous. It was literally unfinished walls, with 2 fold-out tables sitting in the middle. That right there told me everything I needed to know about how young this company really was. While I was waiting, another guy walked in. He had this overly smug air about him, the kind of person who talks loud enough so everyone nearby hears how important he thinks he is. He started bragging to another employee about how he'd just landed 5 more customers for the company. His buddy, sounding skeptical, asked him how they were going to manage that when they still hadn't finished the installs for the first 7 customers they had already sold to. Without missing a beat, the smug sales guy laughed and said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't worry, we're interviewing some idiot right now who's going to have to work straight through without a single break until every install is complete." He said it like it was the funniest thing in the world, not even thinking about who might be listening. And that's when he noticed me. I was sitting there, in plain sight. He stopped mid-sentence, gave me this confused look, and asked who I was. I looked right at him and said, "I'm the idiot you're trying to hire to do all of that work." The look on his face was absolutely priceless. You could see the realization hit him instantly. He was the actual idiot in that moment. He opened his mouth to try and say something, but before he could recover, one of the interviewers came out and called me back into the office. I walked in with this new perspective on the company. When I sat down, they made me an offer on the spot. At that point, I decided to push back. I countered with a number that was 3 times higher than what they'd offered. I told them flat out that I knew I would be the only one doing all of the installs, that I'd be stuck traveling nonstop for at least the next 3 months, and that if they wanted me to do it, they'd have to make it worth my time. The room went silent. They just stared at me, blinking, like they didn't know how to respond. Finally, the owner spoke up. He admitted he couldn't afford to pay that much right then, but said they'd make it up to me later, with a bonus once the company took off. That didn't sit right with me. Promises of later, don't pay for time on the road, or the stress of endless travel. So I politely told them no thank you and walked out. A couple of months later, I heard through the grapevine that the company had folded. Multiple customers canceled their orders, probably fed up with delays and empty promises. In the end, I realized I dodged a bullet by not taking that job. That story wraps up here. I love the moment where he told the smug sales guy he was the idiot being interviewed. What stood out was how quickly the tone shifted, from thinking it might be a good opportunity to realizing the whole setup was a mess. I was also surprised at how bold he was with the counteroffer, tripling the number, but honestly, it made sense given what he overheard. And the way the company folded just a couple months later really tied it all together. Sometimes walking away is the best move. This next story is about a teenager who went to bed one night, only to wake up and find out their mom and friends swore they had vanished without a trace. This is honestly the most unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. And even though it's been 10 years, I still think about it all the time. To be clear, no one was under the influence of anything. It was just one of those ordinary nights that somehow turned into something I still can't wrap my head around. At the time, I was 16 years old, living in a small desert town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Really tight-knit, quiet, not much going on. My best friend, who I'll call T, was basically like family. She was over at my house so often that my mom treated her like another daughter. That night she was staying over, and another close friend of mine, my neighbor, who I'll call S, was also hanging out. T decided to stay in and watch a movie in the living room with my mom. S and I went out into the backyard, just talking the way teenagers do when it's late, and you're not really doing anything in particular. We probably sat out there for 15 or 20 minutes before S decided she was tired and headed home. Her house was literally right next door, so it wasn't a big deal. I went back inside, told my mom and T that I was heading to bed, and that was that. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. I went to my room, crawled under my blankets, and fell asleep like any other night. The next morning, I got up and walked into the living room. My mom and T both looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. They immediately started questioning me, asking where I'd been all night. At first I thought they were joking, but the more they pressed, the more I realized they were dead serious. I told them exactly what had happened. I went outside with S. She left after a little while. I came back in, said goodnight, and went to bed. Simple as that. But they both swore that I wasn't in the house after that point. According to them, once the movie ended, they noticed I wasn't around. They checked the couch, shook out the blankets, looked all over the house, and couldn't find me anywhere. They went outside, called for me, even called out for S. When I didn't answer, they actually got in the car, drove around the neighborhood, and were yelling our names into the night, and still, nothing. It was like we had both disappeared. The next morning, they were still convinced I'd snuck out. And I get it. That's what teenagers are known for. But the thing is, I never had to sneak out. My mom gave me a lot of freedom, and if I wanted to go somewhere, I could just say so. Sneaking out wasn't even something I had a reason to do. Later, I asked S about it, and she confirmed what I remembered. She went straight home that night, and I went straight to bed. That was it. No wandering, no sneaking, no disappearing act. But somehow, for my mom and T, it was like I had vanished for hours. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I've gone over that night in my head again and again, and it's still the strangest, most unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. That's the end of this story. That one gave me chills. What really stood out was how normal the night seemed, right up until the morning when everyone's memories didn't line up. It's wild to think about how two different perspectives of the same night can be so drastically different. I also couldn't help but laugh a little at the detail of them driving around the neighborhood calling their names, while the storyteller was just asleep in bed. It's eerie, but also kind of fascinating how something so simple can feel so unsettling years later. This next story is about a woman who turned the tables on her manipulative husband and his secret girlfriend after finding out her child had been mistreated. This happened years ago, and while I've healed from it, it still feels like one of the wildest chapters of my life. Back then, I was just 20 years old, married to a 26-year-old man. The marriage wasn't something I walked into freely. He pressured me into it as a way to prove my love. Looking back, the red flags were everywhere. Over time, the relationship turned into a cycle of abandonment, manipulation, and abuse. I realized after a while that I couldn't just walk away cleanly. Every attempt at confrontation turned into him twisting things back on me. So I decided the only way out was to play his own game. I studied therapeutic interviewing techniques, practiced them every single day, and slowly learned how to flip the script. My plan was simple: guide him into thinking divorce was his idea. One day, during one of these so-called sessions, I shifted into therapist mode and asked why he wouldn't just let me go. To my surprise, he confessed something I wasn't expecting. He admitted he'd been cheating on me. He explained that he had told the other woman that everything in our lives, the house, the business, the cars, belonged to him. And then he added that if I really loved him, I'd let him reel her in before leaving. I kept my face calm, even though inside I was boiling. I thanked him for being honest, and even pretended to give my blessing for his little dates. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was already apartment hunting, preparing my exit. Eventually, the divorce process started, but the most dramatic moment happened before the paperwork was finalized. At the time, we had a toddler together. When I suddenly lost my daycare provider, he pushed me into letting his girlfriend babysit. Every instinct in me screamed no, but he framed it like I had no choice. Against my better judgment, I agreed. For the first couple of days, things seemed uneventful. But on the third day, my son clung to me, crying, begging not to go back. I gently coaxed the truth out of him. Through tears, he told me she had locked him out on the deck because he didn't want to come inside. He stood there, crying in the cold, while she laughed through the window at him. And to make it worse, his dad told him not to tell me about it. Hearing that broke me in a way I can't even describe. I reassured my son, promised him I'd keep him safe, and scrambled to find emergency childcare through a friend. Once I knew he was cared for, I drove straight back to the house. Rage carried me the whole way. I stormed up to the door and pounded on it like I had a search warrant, screaming for her to come out. She peeked through the blinds, eyes wide, but never opened the door. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I kept my voice calm and steady and said, "There's someone in my house, I don't know." Within minutes, the police showed up. She tried to spin it, painting me as the bitter ex-wife, but the officers weren't buying it. When they asked her for proof of residence, she had nothing. Her address was tied to her Section 8 housing elsewhere. Meanwhile, I walked to the mailbox, pulled out letters with my name and address on them, and handed them over. That was all the proof they needed. The officer turned to me and asked what I wanted to do. I could have pressed charges, but at that moment, I didn't even want to go down that road. I told him I just wanted her out. They escorted her away, and I immediately changed the keypad code and locked everything up tight. I stood inside, watching as she walked away in the dead of winter near the Canadian border. No coat, no car, nothing. Not long after, my ex called me, furious. That's when I gave him the one line I've been waiting to say. Now she knows what it feels like to be locked out in the cold. Petty? Absolutely. Justified? I still believe so, even now, years later. That story ends there. That one was intense. What stood out most to me was how calm she stayed on the outside while carrying so much anger underneath, especially during that 911 call. The detail about her son being locked out while being laughed at through the window was just brutal to hear, and the way she flipped everything in the end, showing proof while the other woman had none, felt like such a sharp reversal of power. The last line especially hit, cold and cutting, but also kind of poetic after everything that happened. This next story is about a father who clashed with his in-laws after his niece ruined his daughter's belongings, leading him to put a lock on her bedroom door. My brother-in-law, Sammy, lost his home not long after his divorce, about 10 months ago. A couple of months back, he moved in with us and brought his twin daughters, Olivia and Sloane, who are both 18. My wife and I have a 16-year-old daughter, Zoe. The girls aren't especially close, but they've always managed to get along well enough, at least on the surface. The real problem started when Olivia and Sloane showed zero respect for Zoe's privacy. They had this habit of just walking into her room and grabbing whatever caught their eye. It wasn't just little things either. They'd take makeup, phone accessories, pieces of clothing, even her school laptop. Zoe complained to me more than once, and every time I asked the twins to respect her space and stop taking her stuff. My wife and Sammy, though, didn't see an issue with it. They brushed it off, saying it was typical teenage girl behavior. But from where I was standing, it didn't matter if it was typical. It wasn't fair to Zoe. The last straw came when Zoe bought herself a makeup kit. It wasn't just any kit. It was a $60 MAC set that looked like a little painter's palette. She had saved up for over a month to buy it. She was so proud of it. Then one day, she found it ruined. The shades had all been mixed together, making it unusable. She was devastated. She told me that Sloan had taken it without permission, used it, and left it on her bed afterward. I may not know much about makeup, but I know what it looks like when something expensive and carefully chosen gets destroyed. Zoe was in tears, and at that point, I knew I had to step in. I told my wife what happened, and she said she'd ask Sloan to apologize. But an apology wasn't going to fix the bigger problem. Zoe was so worried about her belongings being taken or ruined that she had actually started moving her valuable things out of the house to keep them safe. That's when I bought her a lock for her bedroom door. The reaction was instant. Sammy and his daughters noticed the lock and were furious. The twins were upset, and Sammy confronted me about it. He said, "My daughters aren't thieves. It's normal for girls to borrow each other's stuff." Then he dismissed Zoe's makeup entirely, saying she could just get another kit for $15 from Walmart, and that she shouldn't even be buying adult makeup in the first place. He went as far as to call it a defect in Zoe's personality, saying she was trying to act older than she was. And then he turned it on me, accusing me of babying her and enabling her with overprotection. I told him that this was between me and my wife, not him. But when I explained myself to her, she shamed me for putting a lock on Zoe's door at all. She said it embarrassed her cousins, made them feel unwelcome, and prevented them from spending time with Zoe. She told me that if we had taken them in, we should treat them like daughters too. She demanded I take the lock off. I refused. I told her the lock stays until her brother and his daughters move out. That's when she got mad, saying I was implying we should kick them out, and warned me that her family would hate me for it. But I reminded her her family had already refused to take Sammy and the girls in when they needed a place to stay. If it weren't for me agreeing to open our home, we wouldn't even be dealing with this situation. I told her if she wanted to hand out shame, she could start with her own family for refusing to help their son and nieces. Now the entire house is tense. Zoe and I are getting the silent treatment from everyone. My wife is upset, Sammy won't look at me, and the twins act like I'm the villain. But at the end of the day, all I did was make sure my daughter has the privacy and respect she deserves in her own home. That's where this story ends. That one had a lot going on. What stood out most was how quickly a simple lock on a door became this huge family fight. The way Zoe had to start moving her own belongings out of the house really stuck with me. That says everything about how unsafe she felt in her own room. I also found it surprising that the uncle tried to frame stealing as borrowing and then criticized Zoe for buying something nice for herself. It's such a small fix, but the emotions behind it turned into something way bigger than just a lock on a door. This next story is about a driver who got pulled over by a police officer and ended up leaving with a smile after the situation took an unexpected turn. This happened just this morning. I was out driving, minding my own business, and came up to a four-way stop. I know for sure I made a complete and full stop. I'm careful about things like that, but not long after, I saw flashing lights in my mirror and realized a police vehicle was pulling me over. I pulled to the side, parked, and before the officer even reached the car, I turned my dash cam around so it was facing me and would also capture whoever came up to the driver's side window. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I like having things recorded just in case. When the officer walked up, I rolled down my window and asked, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" He gave me this look, almost like I was something unpleasant he had stepped on. Then he said flatly, "You didn't make a complete stop." I reached up and adjusted one of my hearing aids. To give some background, I lost part of my hearing years ago when I was working as a touring session musician. Before I could explain that though, the officer suddenly barked, "Sir, take off your earphones when I'm talking to you." That's when I realized what was happening. My hearing aids look a lot like Apple AirPods, so to him it must have looked like I was wearing headphones and ignoring him. So I carefully took both hearing aids out and set them in my hand. Without them though, I can barely hear. I can read lips a little bit, but since we were both wearing masks, I couldn't catch what he was saying. I tried to bridge the gap. I started speaking while also signing at the same time, telling him, "I'm deaf, and I didn't understand what you just said. Can you communicate to me in ASL, please?" I figured it was worth asking, even though not everyone knows American Sign Language. He didn't even try. Instead, he pointed at my hearing aids and motioned for me to put them back on, clearly thinking they were just wireless earbuds. I shook my head and responded, Yes, officer, but without these, I can only communicate in ASL. Please instruct me in ASL, and I will be compliant in every possible way. That's when he glanced up and noticed my dash cam, sitting there, aimed perfectly at us. I saw his shoulders sink a little, and I could tell the realization hit him. Everything he was saying and doing was being recorded. Under his breath, almost like a mutter, he said, "For F's sake." Then, without another word, he waved his hands in this awkward motion and gave me 2 thumbs up, basically telling me to go. So I rolled up my window, pulled back onto the road, and drove away at the exact legal speed limit. And I couldn't wipe the grin off my face the rest of the day. That small moment turned into something I'll probably remember for a long time. That story stops there. What stood out most was the officer realizing he was on camera and instantly changing his tune. I also thought it was wild how quickly he jumped to the conclusion that the hearing aids were just headphones. The 2 thumbs up at the end was kind of hilarious. Like he just gave up on the whole thing. I can see why the storyteller was smiling the rest of the day after that. This next story is about a man whose girlfriend secretly had his classic car project hauled off to the scrapyard while he was away on a trip. I'll try to keep this straightforward, but honestly, it's one of the wildest things that's ever happened to me. Back in February of 2019, I bought myself a 1967 Impala, a 4-door. It was my dream project, something I'd been saving for, and I put my heart into it. Fast forward a little while, and I bought my first house. The place had a 2.5-car garage, which to me meant the perfect setup. 1 bay for the chassis, 1 bay for the body, and the rest of the space packed wall to wall with parts. I had it all laid out. Little by little, I started tearing the car down for a complete restoration. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a huge part of my daily life. Anyone who's ever taken on a project car knows the mix of patience, excitement, and frustration that goes into it. Every new part ordered, every greasy bolt removed, every late night in the garage. It was my sanctuary. A couple of months ago, my girlfriend moved in with me during all the craziness in the world. From the very beginning, she hated that car. She couldn't stand that the garage was full and she couldn't park in there. The thing is, I live on 2 acres. There are more than enough spots for parking, shaded areas under trees, and even a barn if she really wanted her car indoors. I told her, tough luck. This is my house, and that car isn't something I can just toss back together to move. Then came the trip that changed everything. I had to leave town for a couple of days for work. I'm employed with a small local company, so nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. When I got back, she was all smiles, cooking for me, doing chores, being almost overly sweet. At first I thought maybe she just missed me, but then I noticed something odd. Her car wasn't parked in its usual spot. I asked her about it casually, just so I'd know where to mow and keep things neat. She told me not to worry because she had parked it in the garage. My stomach dropped immediately. I asked her how that was even possible. That's when she smiled and told me to go check it out. When I opened the garage, my world fell apart. Every single piece of that car was gone. The chassis, the body, the drivetrain, every last part I'd been working on. All of it had been hauled off. She admitted she had hired people while I was gone to move everything to a scrapyard. She thought she was solving the problem of the garage being full. I can't even describe the feeling in that moment. I had spent over $11,000 on that project between the car itself, new parts, and services. And it wasn't just about money. It was all my time, my effort, my passion, gone, like it was nothing. I told her right then and there that I was taking her to court. She brushed it off, acting like I was being dramatic, like it was just an old junk car. I told her to pack her things and leave. We were done. She didn't take me seriously until I pulled out all the receipts I'd kept and showed her the security camera footage of her letting those guys in. Her friends and family started blowing up my phone, telling me to just let it go, saying she couldn't possibly pay back what I'd spent. But to me, it wasn't just about the money. It was about what she stole from me, something I'd invested myself into for a year and a half. So I got a lawyer. I filed a report, and I decided I was going to fight. At first, it was just a waiting game. I gave the police all the documentation, receipts, security footage, even the car's title in my name. They told me they'd be in contact with me, her, and the scrapyard. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't letting it go. And then came the biggest twist of all. The police found my car. Turns out the scrapyard guys had been trying to hide it. When the police showed up, they found it on a forklift, being moved behind piles of other cars, ready to be buried out of sight. The guys claimed it was theirs, even saying they had the title. But when the police matched the VIN on the body and chassis to my title, there was no question. It was mine. At least one of the scrapyard workers was arrested, and the police said they were looking deeper into that place for other stolen vehicles. They haven't been able to get in touch with my ex yet, but that's just a matter of time. For now, the car is considered evidence, so I can't take it home yet, but I will. Luckily, I had an entire album of photos showing every stage of me tearing the car down, so I can identify what's mine and hopefully get all the parts back. For the first time since all this started, I actually feel a little relief. I know there's still a long road ahead, but at least I know my Impala didn't disappear forever. She's gonna be alright. That's where the story finishes. That one felt huge. The kind of story where you can really feel how much someone put into a project. What stuck out most was how quickly something so personal got dismissed as just a car by everyone else. The part about the scrapyard trying to hide it really surprised me too. That sounds like something straight out of a crime show. I get why the ending felt like such a win for him. After everything, just knowing the car was found must have been an incredible feeling. This next story is about a high schooler and their coworker who came up with a prank to deal with rude customers, but now they're wondering if it went too far. I work weekends at a coffee shop, and for the most part, it's a pretty easy job. I'm still in high school, so it's not like I'm making a career out of it, but it's nice having a steady paycheck and a place to hang out with coworkers. The people I work with on weekends are usually James, who happens to be the owner's son, and Danielle, a college student who covers shifts sometimes. James technically has a shift manager title, but it's nothing official or strict. He's more like the guy who steps in if something goes wrong. He's chill, easy to get along with, and we go to the same school, so there's a bit of overlap in our social circles too. Now, one thing that always amazes me about this job is how angry some customers get over the smallest stuff. Like, I know people take their coffee seriously, but some of these folks act like we've ruined their entire lives if it isn't exactly how they want it. You can kind of tell when someone is already in a bad mood before they walk in. They're just looking for someone to snap at. And unfortunately, that ends up being the high schooler or the college student behind the counter. I always find myself thinking, how miserable do you have to be to unload all that on a kid making you a latte? So one day, after dealing with a string of particularly cranky customers, James and I started joking around. We came up with this idea. Whenever someone totally blows up over nothing, we'd stage a fake firing to throw them off. It sounded funny in the moment, and honestly, it felt like a way to get back at people who thought they could just steamroll over us. The first time we actually tried it was with a guy who started yelling about how his coffee wasn't hot enough. He was red in the face, ranting about how it was unacceptable, even though I had literally just handed it to him straight out of the machine. I couldn't do anything about the temperature. That's just how it comes out. That's when James stepped in. He walked up, looked super serious, and asked, "Sir, is there a problem here?" The guy immediately turned his anger onto James, ranting all over again. James listened for a second, then turned to me and said, "This is unacceptable. You're fired." I jumped right into character. I dropped my shoulders, looked crushed, and started pleading. "No, please don't fire me. My family needs the money. I need this job, please." I really leaned into it, putting on my best sad face. James doubled down, acting like this strict manager, telling me to take off my apron and leave. The transformation in the angry customer was instant. His face changed from furious to panicked, and he started backtracking fast. He said, "Wait, it's not that big of a deal. You don't need to fire her over this." I didn't mean it. He actually looked guilty, like he hadn't realized how far his little outburst could go. James just kept his serious tone, saying something like, "We pride ourselves on the best customer service, and this won't be tolerated." Of course, after the whole act, I still had my job. James and I were just messing with him, but the look on the guy's face was priceless. We've done it a few more times since then. If someone screams at Danielle or me, James will storm in and fire us. And almost every time, the person who was angry suddenly turns apologetic, insisting they didn't mean it and that it's not worth losing someone's job over. It's weirdly satisfying, like making them face the reality that their actions have consequences, even if it's staged. But then I told some friends at school about what we'd been doing, and their reactions weren't what I expected. A few of them laughed, but others said it was kind of a mean prank. They pointed out that the customer walks away, thinking they might have actually gotten someone fired, especially someone who seems desperate and in need of the paycheck. Now I'm stuck wondering, is it actually funny? Or does it cross the line? I can't decide if it's harmless theater or a little too cruel. That's the end of this story. What stuck with me in this one was just how fast people can flip their attitude when they think their actions actually matter. It's kind of surprising how a customer who was so loud and aggressive one second suddenly becomes calm and apologetic the next. That reaction really shows how much of their anger was just for show. It also makes me think about how often people treat workers poorly until they feel a bit of pressure themselves. This next story is about a young man who inherited his father's house, only to have his stepmother treat it like her own and push him aside until he finally took matters into his own hands. I'm an only son, and my life changed dramatically after my mom passed away from ovarian cancer when she was only 55. Losing her shattered my dad. They had been together since college, practically inseparable, and he was never quite the same afterward. I was 17 at the time, just finishing high school and preparing to head off to college on a full-ride scholarship. That detail will matter later. During my mom's final months, one of her nurses, Grace, started becoming very close with my dad. At first, she seemed like the nurturing, comforting presence he needed, and to him, she probably was. But from my perspective, even as a teenager, I could sense something off. She felt opportunistic, like she was biding her time until she could get closer to my dad once my mom was gone. Still, it wasn't my place to say much. In our family, the son doesn't tell the father how to live his life. For about a year after my mom's death, Grace kept in touch, checking in here and there. Then she made her move. By the time my dad was 57, she was fully part of his life. Grace was younger, only 40, and I didn't trust her intentions. But I couldn't deny that my dad seemed a little less lonely. And for that reason alone, I bit my tongue and tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. They married after 6 months of dating. I didn't like it, but I respected his choice. Unfortunately, my dad's health just kept fading. The grief of losing my mom was too much for him, and no amount of companionship could change that. One day, when he was especially weak, he asked me what I needed for the future, if there was anything he could set aside for me. I told him honestly that I didn't need much. I reminded him that I had a full scholarship and I could make my own way. What mattered more to me was that he had sisters and nieces and nephews to consider too. By 59, he was gone. It was a devastating blow, even though part of me had been bracing for it. When his will was read, the house, our family home, was left to me. He gave a little to his sisters and their kids. Grace received the majority of his money, several $100,000. I got some cash too, but nothing compared to her share. That was fine by me. What I cared about most was that the house remained in my name. Grace wasn't happy. She acted polite on the surface, but it was clear she was furious the house wasn't hers, especially because it was in a prime neighborhood, worth a fortune if sold. Still, I let her live there, mainly because I was away at college and barely around. I downplayed the fact that the house was mine, and she seemed to forget it legally belonged to me. Over time, she even started acting like she was the rightful owner. That illusion cracked when she began dating some guy named Ivan. Sleazy, only a few years older than me, and they both acted like I was a guest in my own house. Grace even gave away my PlayStation 4 to one of Yvonne's relatives, saying I was too old for video games. That was the final straw. I didn't show my hand right away. Instead, I smiled, congratulated her when she announced she was marrying Ivan, and agreed to watch the house while they went on a wedding trip to her home country. She seemed thrilled, thinking I'd soon move on and leave the house to her. The second she left, I moved fast. I hired movers, packed up all her belongings, and paid for a storage unit with 4 months covered in advance. Then I changed every lock in the house. I rented the place to a young family who loved it and even introduced them to my lawyer, the same one my dad had used, so they'd have legal backup if Grace caused trouble. When Grace came back and found out what I'd done, she tried to raise hell, but with legal documents on my side and my lawyer ready to shut her down, she had no ground to stand on. She and Ivan ended up leaving the country, probably blowing through what was left of my dad's money. Meanwhile, I kept the house as a rental, earning enough from it to cover more than just my own expenses. I was able to help my cousins with college, move into a better apartment in the city, and even start my life with the woman I eventually got engaged to. And looking back, I realized something. If Grace had been respectful, if she had simply treated me like family and not tried to take over everything, I probably would have let her stay. But she didn't. She treated me like I was disposable, and in the end, she was the one who found herself on the outside. That's the end of this story. What got me here is how patient he was before pulling the trigger. He could have kicked her out the moment things started feeling wrong, but instead he played it calm and waited until the timing was perfect. That quiet buildup made the payoff even stronger. The detail about her giving away his PlayStation really stood out. It was such a small thing compared to the house, but it showed just how entitled she felt. And honestly, the way he handled it with planning instead of yelling says a lot about his character. This next story is about a man raising his late friend's daughter, only to have his brother's fiancée secretly DNA test the child and confront him with the results in front of the little girl. I'm 30 years old, and I'm raising a 6-year-old daughter who isn't biologically mine. There's no blood relation between us at all. But to me, she's my child in every way that matters. To explain how that came to be, I have to go back a little. I grew up with her mother. She and I were friends for most of our childhood, and while people sometimes assumed we'd end up together, that never happened. We were just friends. Close ones, but never romantic. When she was 23, she got married to her husband, who was 25, and they had their daughter together. Then tragedy struck. When their little girl was only about 3 months old, both of them were killed in a workplace shooting. I won't get into the details, but they both worked in the same building, and neither of them made it out. It was one of those events that rocks an entire community. But for me, it also meant their daughter was suddenly left without anyone. They didn't have siblings, and their own families weren't really in a place to care for a child. So there was no obvious next of kin. Because I'd been close with them my whole life, I stepped up. At first, I wasn't sure. I'd never been someone who thought much about kids, and I doubted whether I was ready. But the thought of her being shuffled into foster care or ending up with people who didn't have any connection to her parents felt unbearable. So I adopted her. That little girl is Lily, and I've raised her ever since. My family knows she's not biologically mine, and Lily herself knows she's adopted. I've always been open with her about it. She knows her parents died when she was a baby, and she understands, in a simplified way, that a bad man was responsible. The deeper details are something I'm saving for when she's older and can process it. Physically, Lily looks nothing like me. She takes after her biological mom and dad. People often assume she's my biological daughter, who just got her looks from her mother, and most of the time, I don't correct them. It doesn't feel necessary. She's my daughter, regardless of what people think. Fast forward to now. My brother has been with his fiancée for about 2 years. A few weeks ago, we were all at my parents' house, and she noticed an old photo of me with Lily's mom and dad. She pointed to my friend, Lily's mom, and asked who she was. I explained casually that she was Lily's mother. My brother's fiancée got quiet and just stood there looking at the photo for a long moment. I didn't think much of it. Later, I found out she'd taken things into her own hands. Without telling me, she arranged for a DNA test on my daughter. She used my brother's DNA as a comparison, and when the results came back showing no relation, she took that as proof that I wasn't Lily's biological father. Then, instead of keeping this to herself, she confronted me with the results. She came up waving the paper in my face and declared, in front of Lily, that I was raising a dead woman's affair baby. Those were her exact words. She said it with this smug energy, like she'd uncovered some deep, dark secret. For a moment, I just stared at her, and then I burst out laughing, because how else do you even respond to something like that? I told her, very plainly, that I was already well aware Lily wasn't my biological daughter. There's this thing called adoption, after all. She turned bright red, like she hadn't even considered that possibility, and then stormed off. My brother wasn't amused. He got upset at me, saying I'd embarrassed his fiancée. I told him she embarrassed herself by DNA testing a child who isn't hers, and then announcing the results like some big reveal. What exactly was she expecting me to do? Fall apart? Abandon Lily? Treat her differently? My brother tried to defend her, saying she thought she was doing the right thing, but I can't figure out what her right thing even was. To me, it feels like she crossed a massive boundary and dragged my daughter into something she had no business being a part of. So here I am, wondering if maybe I overreacted by laughing at her, but deep down, I don't think I was the one in the wrong. That's where the story ends. What hits me about this story is how unnecessary the fiancé's actions were. Nobody asked her to get involved, and she went out of her way to stir something up that didn't even exist. It's wild that she thought she'd uncovered a scandal when the truth was already out in the open. The part that stood out most was her doing it in front of the little girl. That's the kind of move that just feels careless. Honestly, it makes you wonder what she thought the end goal was supposed to be. This next story is about a man whose parents constantly shamed him for living with his fiancée before marriage, until he turned the tables on them at a family dinner. I work as a nurse practitioner, mainly handling low-risk maternity cases. A big part of my job is supporting mothers through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum care. My fiancée is completing her residency, so between the two of us, our lives are pretty wrapped up in medicine and long work hours. We've lived together for a few years now, and while marriage has always been part of our plan, we've never felt a need to rush. Life just got busy, and we postponed it. The thing is, my parents are very religious. To them, the idea of me living with my partner outside of marriage is nothing short of living in sin. It drives them crazy. They bring it up constantly, and it's been the source of more arguments than I can count. Personally, I don't care. I'm an adult, and I make my own choices. My fiancé and I are actually getting married in June, but honestly, that's for us, not to satisfy anyone else's opinions. This past Christmas, my fiancé and I visited my parents' house. The entire family was there. My parents, my 3 siblings, their spouses, all the grandchildren, plus us. 17 people in total. Dinner was loud, crowded, and honestly a little overwhelming. But that's family gatherings for you. Then my mom started in on one of her favorite topics. She said how glad she was that we were finally getting married, and how she wouldn't have to feel embarrassed at church anymore. My dad joined in, praising my 3 older siblings for either waiting until marriage to live together or getting married right away. Meanwhile, my fiancé sat there, visibly embarrassed, and I could feel myself getting angrier by the second. We've had this fight too many times, and to have it dragged out in front of everyone over Christmas dinner felt like the last straw. I've told them before that they can't control how I live my life. I've even stopped staying with them when I visit. Hotels are easier, less stressful, and frankly, less judgmental. But this time, I decided I wasn't going to let it slide. So I casually started talking about a premature baby I'd been reading about. The baby had been born nearly 3 months early and weighed only 1.6 pounds, but was strong and doing well in the NICU. As I said this, I noticed both my mom and dad freeze. Their faces looked like they'd been caught in headlights. That reaction told me everything. I asked, almost innocently, if we could check the family album. Specifically, I wanted to look at my oldest brother's records. See, I'd been told all my life that he was born nearly 4 months premature. But here's the kicker. My grandmother once let it slip that he was over 9 pounds and almost 23 inches long when he was born. That is not a premature baby. That is a very full-term, very large baby. So I brought it up right there at the table. The conversation shifted quickly, but the damage was done. My parents looked flustered and tried to change the subject. Later, after dinner, they pulled me aside and scolded me for embarrassing them with private matters that weren't my concern. I told them, plain and simple, if I ever heard another word about my living arrangements, I'd keep bringing up the fact that my mom was already in her 2nd trimester when she got married. They didn't like that one bit, but I think the point landed. Now they're mad at me for supposedly telling them how to behave in their own home. But for the first time in years, the subject of my living situation has been dropped completely. My fiancée, on the other hand, is relieved and grateful that I stood up for her and finally shut the whole conversation down. That's the end of this story. What stands out here is how quickly parents can forget their own past when they're pointing fingers. The hypocrisy is almost funny once it's exposed. I like that he didn't yell or lose his cool. He just dropped one fact and let it sit. You can tell it hit the mark because his parents scrambled to shut it down right away. And honestly, the relief from his fiancée probably made it all worth it. Sometimes the quiet comeback is way more effective than a loud argument. This next story is about a woman who discovered her Uber driver was trash-talking her in his native language, only for her to clap back in the best possible way. This happened a few years back, not long after I'd moved to Chicago. Before that, I had been living in Romania for school. I absolutely loved it there. The culture, the people, the pace of life. It was an experience I'll always be grateful for. But because of where I was living, I didn't really have a choice except to learn the language quickly and thoroughly. Outside of the university, most people didn't speak English. So if I wanted to function day to day, I had to get good at Romanian, and fast. So fast forward to a few months after I landed in Chicago. I was still settling into American life again when one day I ordered an Uber. The driver's name popped up on my phone, and I noticed immediately that it looked distinctly Romanian. Chicago has a big Eastern European community, so I guess it shouldn't have been that surprising, but I was genuinely excited. I thought, here's my chance to practice the language and maybe even make a friendly connection so I don't get rusty. The car pulled up and I hopped in. The driver greeted me politely enough, but he was already on the phone with someone, so I didn't want to interrupt. I just sat back quietly in the rear seat while he continued chatting. The call seemed casual. He was talking to a buddy, or maybe a family member. The other person asked him something about when he was getting off work, and that's when things took a turn. The driver responded, in Romanian, "No, I still have a few hours left, then I'll go home. Right now I have someone in the car." So far, nothing unusual. But then he added, with this really dismissive tone, "God, I hate this country. The women here are so fat and ugly. At least this one has a nice chest, but why can't she lose some weight?" I froze for a second, realizing he was talking about me, and he didn't stop there. He kept going, rambling on about all the things supposedly wrong with American women, and how much better things were back home. Now, I've always been on the chonkier side, and in Romania, people never hesitated to point it out. It's part of the culture there. Everyone comments on weight, whether you want them to or not. So I was used to hearing those kinds of remarks, but hearing them come from someone driving me around, assuming I couldn't understand a word he was saying, that hit differently. At first I just sat there, kind of bemused, letting him dig his own hole. We got closer to my destination, and I decided it was time to let him know he'd messed up. I leaned forward slightly and, in perfect Romanian, with the exact regional accent I had picked up while living overseas, said calmly, "Can you just pull over there? On the right?" The effect was instant. His head whipped around so fast it was like something out of The Exorcist. His eyes went wide. His face flushed a deep shade of red, and for a second, he just looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't say a word after that, just quietly pulled over and stopped the car. When I got out, I turned back one last time. Still in Romanian, I told him, "You're not attractive, and you're also fat, so maybe you shouldn't make comments like that." Then I shut the door, walked away, and felt this wave of pride wash over me. In that moment, I had never felt so satisfied with myself. All those years of struggling with the language, all the times I was self-conscious about my weight, it all flipped into this perfect revenge that he never saw coming. That story wraps up here. The best part of this is how she didn't even plan some big dramatic response. She just waited for the right moment and let the language skills do the work. It must have been so satisfying to see him instantly realize he'd been caught. You can tell he wasn't expecting any pushback at all, and that's what makes it sting more. I like that she didn't drag it out either. Just one clean line and done. Sometimes the simplest response leaves the deepest mark. This next story is about a tenant who realized their roommates were scheming to push them out, only for things to flip when they turned the tables in the most unexpected way. It all started last week when I noticed something strange. My roommates, who are sisters, seemed to be working together to drive me out of the house. At first I thought I was just imagining it, but the signs became too obvious to ignore. They kept hinting about wanting one of their boyfriends to move in, and suddenly I was the obstacle in the way. At first I tried to brush it off. I figured if I just minded my own business and stayed out of the drama, it would blow over. But then the little setup started happening. I'd come home to some random mess in the kitchen or the living room, and they'd act like I was the one who made it. They'd corner me and raise their voices, claiming I wasn't pulling my weight or that I was wasting their space. It was also ridiculous, because I knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to make me so miserable that I'd leave on my own. Things escalated when they called a house meeting. I sat down with them, thinking maybe they wanted to actually talk things through like adults. Instead, one of them blew up. She got so angry that the other had to hold her back while she screamed in my face, saying she hated me and that I wasn't welcome in the building anymore. Then, as if that wasn't enough, they went on to say I didn't contribute anything to the house and that they had convinced the landlady not to renew my lease when it ended in June. I just sat there and let them rant. When they finished, I told them I'd speak with the landlady myself. They tried to pull rank, claiming they were the heads of the house, but I couldn't help but laugh. I wasn't going to just let them boss me around like that. So the very next day, I went to the landlady. She was surprisingly understanding. She admitted that the sisters had gotten in her ear and that, technically, she had given them the power to block my lease renewal. But she also told me she recognized how unfair the whole situation was. She said I could move out whenever I wanted and that I wouldn't have to pay for a single day I wasn't there. Hearing that was like a weight off my shoulders. That was all I needed. Yesterday, as soon as my roommates left town to visit their family, I jumped into action. I called to everyone I knew, friends, relatives, anyone who could lend a hand. And together we emptied out the house of everything I owned. And I mean everything. The curtains, the rugs, all the little touches that made the place feel like a home. They were mine, and I took them with me. Even the cat toys and the cat tower that I had built with my mom came with me. I didn't just stop there. I went through the common spaces and carefully moved all of their things off my shelves and furniture. I stacked their stuff neatly in the middle of the living room, leaving the place looking bare and hollow. It was almost eerie, seeing it so empty. Before I left, I snapped pictures of everything, just in case there was ever any question about what I had taken. Finally, I handed my keys to the landlady, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Now I'm gone, and they won't even know it until tomorrow when they come back from their trip. By then, they'll walk into what feels like a half-empty house. Hundreds of dollars worth of furniture and storage space gone in a flash. The best part? They'll have to scramble to cover the rent until June, or find someone else willing to move in before the boyfriend can. As for me, I'm done. I've blocked them on everything, so I don't have to deal with their inevitable angry messages. I can only imagine the look on their faces when they walk in and realize they played themselves. That's where I finally feel some peace about the whole thing. After all the chaos, it feels pretty good to walk away, knowing they can't say I don't contribute anymore. Because now, I really don't. That's the end of this story. I like how clean this one wrapped up. Instead of more shouting or dragging it out, they just packed up and left everything on their own terms. The fact that the roommates thought they had all the control makes the twist even sharper. I can picture the shock when they walk in and see the house stripped down, with nothing left but their pile of stuff. It's a kind of quiet revenge that doesn't even need words. It just speaks for itself. This next story is about a father who spoke his mind after his son lost a long-distance girlfriend, only to upset his family when he admitted he thought the breakup was deserved. My son had a long-distance girlfriend for about 2 years. She was honestly a wonderful girl, kind, thoughtful, and always making the effort to be present in his life. We all liked her right away, and our whole family welcomed her in whenever she visited. She was flying out here almost every month, spending her weekends and money just to see him. The thing is, he never once lifted a finger to go visit her. I had conversations with him about it more than once. I told him that relationships are a two-way street, and that if she was putting in all this effort, he needed to start making an effort too. I suggested he should be the one flying over sometimes, but every time I brought it up, he refused. My wife didn't help matters either. She constantly said she was afraid of him flying, so he leaned on that excuse to avoid it. I remember sitting both of them down and saying, "Look, this girl is good for you. She's even willing to move countries for you. But she has one very fair condition. You need to show her that you'll travel for her too." Still, he flat out said no. He didn't want to fly, didn't want to travel, didn't want to leave his comfort zone. As time went on, it got worse. He admitted he didn't just dislike the idea of flying. He was completely against traveling anywhere at all. No vacations, no trips, nothing. He said he was fine with the idea of never leaving his own country again. It was hard to watch because you could see the frustration building in her, even though she was still trying. And then last week, he told us she broke up with him. I wasn't shocked. I think deep down, he wasn't either. She even wrote us a letter, apologizing that things didn't work out. She said she cared about him, but couldn't keep carrying the relationship alone. She's still kind enough to stay on good terms with us. And when I checked her social media, I saw she's already with someone new. From what my wife and I can tell, it looks like she may have started seeing him before the breakup was official. Now, here's the part that caused all the trouble. I admitted to my wife and son that I actually agreed with her decision. I told them both that he should have seen it coming. He didn't treat her properly, and I hoped this would teach him something for the future. I said flat out that he deserved the breakup, not because I don't love him, but because he made no effort and let her do all the work. My wife was furious. She said I was being cruel, and my son was deeply hurt by what I said. They were both upset that I wasn't siding with him, but I stood my ground. In my view, if you put nothing into a relationship, you can't expect the other person to stay forever. And that's where we are. My wife and son both think I was out of line, but I still believe I was being honest and realistic about the situation. That story wraps up here. What stood out to me was how direct the dad chose to be. It's rare to see a parent call out their own kid like that, especially in such a sensitive moment, but you can kind of understand why. He'd been watching the imbalance for years and felt like the breakup was inevitable. It makes you wonder how the son will take it long term, whether he'll hold on to the anger or maybe reflect on it later when things cool down. Either way, the honesty definitely hit harder than silence would have. This next story is about a mechanic who had to deal with a stubborn customer that refused critical safety repairs, only for the situation to take a wild turn the moment she drove off. I've been working as a mechanic for my entire career, and over the years, I've seen all kinds of things roll into the shop, but this one experience really stuck with me. A customer came in complaining about a vibration in her vehicle. Nothing unusual there. I hear that kind of complaint almost every week. I put her car up on the lift and started going through the usual checks on the front end. Almost immediately, I spotted the problem. The tie rod was nearly broken, and on top of that, the rack and pinion were faulty. To put it simply, the passenger side front wheel was barely connected to the steering system. It was at the point where, if it gave out while she was driving, that wheel would be completely disconnected from her steering control. In other words, she'd lose control of the car in an instant. I explained everything to her carefully, making sure she understood how serious the situation was. I gave her the estimate for the repair and told her, as calmly as I could, that it was not safe to drive the car in its current condition. Her reaction? She demanded I just put it back together so she could leave. I told her I couldn't do that. If I knowingly let her drive away in a car that unsafe and something happened, I could be held responsible. That's when she snapped. She started yelling, threatening to sue me, even claiming that her cousin's brother knew someone connected to the chief of police. She said I'd be arrested for refusing to give her car back. Then she actually called the police. 2 officers showed up, and I walked them through the issue. I pointed out the broken tie rod, explained the rack and pinion failure, and showed them how unsafe the car really was. To their credit, they understood immediately. But after looking everything over, they told me to just put the car down and let her leave. So that's what I did. But I wasn't about to let it go without some kind of record. I had her sign a statement acknowledging that I'd recommended crucial safety repairs, that I told her it was unsafe to drive, and that she declined. She signed it with this smug little grin, like glad she'd won. She got back in her car and left, and I thought that was the end of it. But less than a minute later, still within sight of the shop, she got pulled over by the very same police officers who had just been there. They wrote her a ticket for reckless driving and had her car impounded on the spot. The look on her face as her vehicle got hooked up to the tow truck was priceless. Meanwhile, I was standing there watching it all unfold, and I'll be honest, it felt good. After all the shouting, the threats, and the nonsense, karma came for her faster than I ever could have imagined. That's the end of this story. What I like about this one is how it played out so neatly. The mechanic tried to do the right thing, and instead of listening, the customer doubled down. Then reality caught up to her almost immediately, and she couldn't blame anyone else. It's funny how sometimes people think they're in control of the situation, but the rules, like safety laws, don't bend just because they want them to. Honestly, it's one of those rare times where the ending lined up perfectly with the effort the mechanic put in. This next story is about an overworked server who got suspended for a misunderstanding, only to turn the tables when the restaurant ended up desperate without him. It all started on a Monday night when I asked my manager if I could have my morning shift covered. He told me not to worry because the new girl was coming in to train and there would be plenty of servers to handle the slow lunch rush. That sounded fine to me, and I trusted him. He was the one making the schedule after all. But the very next day, my phone buzzed with a message from the owner. Now, this guy has the patience of a caffeinated squirrel, jittery, quick to snap, always ready to make things a bigger deal than they are. He wanted to know why I didn't show up to work. I explained, word for word, exactly what my manager had told me. The owner, though, wasn't having it. He said the new girl wasn't a real server yet, so from his perspective, I had just skipped out on my shift. Then, without giving me a chance to argue, he hit me with a 1-week suspension. Here's the thing, though. I wasn't some flaky employee. I was their best waiter. Never late, always on time, constantly pulling in solid tips and positive reviews. Some of the Google reviews for the restaurant even mentioned me by name, but I didn't push back. Instead, I just told him, "All right, boss, see you in a week." And honestly, that week off turned out to be incredible. I slept in, caught up on movies, played rounds of disc golf, and spent time with my friends and my girlfriend. It was the most stress-free week I'd had in years, especially after the grind of working in that place nonstop. By Friday night, though, the cracks started to show. My phone lit up again, and it was the owner, sounding a lot less tough than he had earlier in the week. They were so short-staffed that he admitted they were practically pulling dishwashers out of the back and having them run food to tables. He begged me to come in and help with the Friday dinner rush. Then he asked me to work Saturday night and Sunday morning, all while I was still on suspension. I could have given in, but instead I leaned into it. I told him I hadn't learned my lesson yet and couldn't possibly come in. His frustration came through loud and clear, but at that point, I wasn't budging. When I finally returned the following week, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Suddenly, everyone was polite. People were extra nice to me. The managers treated me with way more respect than before, and that change stuck around. I think that little break, and the chaos they went through without me, was the wake-up call they needed. That story wraps up here. What makes this so great is how the suspension ended up backfiring on the owner. He thought he was making a point, but all he really did was give his best worker a paid vacation from the stress. The fact that the place fell apart without him shows just how much he actually carried. It's rare to see a workplace dynamic flip like that so cleanly, but when it does, you can tell everyone suddenly realizes who really keeps the place running. This next story is about a high school student who found themselves targeted by a teacher who seemed determined to tear them down, no matter how hard they worked. Back in high school, things were pretty smooth for me at first. I wasn't the most popular kid, but I had a good group of friends, decent grades, and I kept myself busy with sports and the student newspaper. For the most part, teachers liked me. I was quiet in class, attentive, and while I wasn't perfect, I wasn't someone who usually made trouble. But everything shifted during my junior year, and it all centered around one teacher. I'd always been a big reader. Even as a freshman, I tore through books, and one of my teachers encouraged me to move into the honors English track. I kept up with that path until the second half of junior year, when I landed in a classical literature class. On paper, that sounded great. I loved Greek and Roman stories, and I had already read most of the typical titles that usually filled a high school reading list. I figured it would be a chance to revisit them and dig deeper. That optimism disappeared almost immediately when I met my teacher, who I'll just call Miss Umbridge. She came across as sugary sweet on the surface, but behind that facade she was harsh, dismissive, and, at least with me, cruel. For reasons I still don't fully understand, she decided from the beginning that she didn't like me. Maybe it was because I sometimes nodded off in class, which I'll admit I did once in a while. At the time, I had undiagnosed thyroid issues, and I was also waking up at 5 in the morning for swim practice. It wasn't like I was slacking off on purpose, but whatever the reason, she zeroed in on me. Her class was heavy on essays, with half of the grade coming from written reports, and the rest from quizzes and a few tests. Since I was on the school paper and had always been a decent writer, I didn't think I'd have any problems. But when I turned in my first paper, I was blindsided. She gave me a D. I couldn't believe it. English had always been one of my strongest subjects. After class, I tried to talk to her about it. I asked what I'd done wrong, because her notes on my paper were almost non-existent. She told me my assessment was uninspired. That was it. When I asked if she had an example of what an inspired paper looked like, she told me to come see her during study hall. I thought she'd show me examples, or at least walk me through what she expected. Instead, she spent nearly the entire period insulting me, calling me an idiot in roundabout ways, without offering any constructive feedback. I left her classroom in tears, feeling humiliated. For the next paper, I asked one of my friends to help me. She was the type of student who never got less than an A- on anything, and she spent hours going through the assignment with me. I turned it in, hopeful. When I got it back, it was another D. My friend was furious. She even took my paper to her AP English teacher, asking for feedback under the guise of prepping it for a writing competition. He told her it was excellent and absolutely A- level work. To test her theory, she had me hand over my first paper too, and he actually said that one was even better. That's when she flat out told me what I'd been afraid to admit. This teacher was grading me unfairly. Still, I wanted to give it one last try. For the next paper, I visited Miss Umbridge 3 separate times during study hall. She wrote notes in red ink all over my drafts, gave me suggestions, and I revised over and over again. By the time the final version was due, I had 3 drafts with her comments. When the paper came back, I had managed to pull a D+. She smirked at me and congratulated me on my improvement. That was the breaking point. I went to my newspaper teacher, who wasn't an English teacher, but had an award-winning student paper under his belt. I asked if he'd look over my essay. He did, and he told me the work was a solid A, with only a few tweaks. That was all I needed. Between him, my friend, and her AP English teacher, I had enough outside opinions to confirm it wasn't my writing that was the problem. It was her. With my swim eligibility on the line because of my falling grade, I set up a meeting with my swim coach and the athletic director. I explained everything, showed them my papers, and even told them about the red-marked drafts. They pulled in the vice principal, and eventually my dad got involved too. Other teachers were asked to grade my essays, and every single one gave me an A- or better. That led to a showdown meeting with Miss Umbridge. She claimed I wasn't capable of honors-level work, and said I should be moved to a basic English class. When confronted with the drafts covered in her handwriting, she flat out denied they were hers and called me a liar. Things exploded from there, and I was asked to step outside while the adults argued. In the end, they moved me to a new class under Miss Honey, the English department head. She was kind, supportive, and quickly saw that I belonged in honors. She even recommended me back into the program for senior year. Looking back, I realize how much damage Miss Umbridge actually did to my confidence. Even now, writing is a huge part of my career, but I still catch myself second-guessing everything I put on paper. She left the school not long after that year, and I honestly hope she never taught again. Some teachers build students up, others break them down. She was definitely the latter. That's where the story ends. It's rough when someone in a position of authority uses that power to tear someone down, instead of helping them grow. What stands out here is how many people, friends, coaches, other teachers, stepped in to confirm the truth when it mattered. Without them, the situation could have looked very different. It's also a reminder of how much impact a single teacher can have, good or bad. And in this case, thankfully, the right people noticed before it did any lasting damage to the narrator's future. This next story is about a construction foreman dealing with a stubborn parent who refused to move her car, only for things to spiral way beyond what she ever expected. So this happened earlier today, and honestly, it was too perfect not to share. I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build, and the location is pretty unusual. The house sits about 250 feet up a hill, and the only way to get to it is by a narrow footpath. That means every single piece of material we use, lumber, drywall, cement bags, you name it, has to be carried up by hand. Imagine carrying an entire house up a hill, piece by piece. It's exhausting, but we've been managing. The one saving grace we have in this nightmare setup are the 2 parking spots at the bottom of the hill. They're officially marked with no parking signs and reserved for our use. Those spots are critical for delivery trucks, and without them, we'd have chaos. The problem is there's an elementary school just half a block away. Every morning and afternoon, parents swarm the area, and many think it's fine to just slip into our clearly marked spots for a few minutes. Now, I'm not unreasonable. If no trucks are scheduled and someone parks there, I usually let it slide. But when we've got deliveries coming in, those spots are non-negotiable. Most of the time, people are polite when asked to move. That is, until today. I got a call from our lumber delivery driver. He was about 2 or 3 minutes out, bringing in everything we needed to frame the roof. That's a massive delivery. giant beams, tons of wood, all stuff that would take at least an hour to haul up by hand. The last thing we needed was him blocking the street with his hazards on when we had perfectly good spots reserved. So I started heading down the hill to meet him, and that's when I saw her, a school mom, sitting in her car, idling in one of our spots. I walked up and, as politely as I could, explained that she was in a tow-away zone and we had a delivery truck pulling in any minute. Without even looking at me properly, she scoffed and said, "I'll just be a few minutes. Your truck isn't here. Take a chill pill, dude." Then she rolled her window back up like I was just some nuisance. Before I could even argue, the lumber truck turned the corner. Perfect timing. I waved at him, then gestured toward her car with the kind of smile that said, "See what I mean?" She rolled her window back down halfway and snapped, "What?" I repeated myself, this time with a firmer tone, telling her she needed to move because she was illegally parked and about to block a full lumber delivery. That's when she gave me the best idea of the day. With an attitude, she said, "Can't you just unload around me? It's not that hard." I smiled, nodded, and walked away. If that's what she wanted, then fine. I'd take her suggestion literally. I instructed the driver to park as close to her car as humanly possible. On one side, we had a porta potty. On the other side, another parked car. With the lumber truck tight against her bumper, she was locked into a perfect little two-car jail. The driver caught on immediately, grinning as he expertly boxed her in. We started unloading, hauling lumber piece by piece up the hill, and I went ahead and called parking enforcement, not to get her in trouble, but just to cover ourselves so the city didn't think we were blocking traffic illegally. The officer said she'd be there in about 30 minutes. Perfect. Meanwhile, her kid came out of school, and that's when she realized her car was so tightly boxed in that she couldn't even open her driver's side door. She awkwardly scrambled across the passenger seat, climbed out, and glared daggers at us the whole time. She loaded her kid in the back, then marched over, demanding we move the truck immediately, because she was in a big hurry. Before I could even respond, the truck driver spoke up with a grin. He told her, "Ma'am, per company policy, I can't move the truck while the load is unsecured." That was true. We had unstrapped everything to unload. She lost it. She shouted about our stupid policies and how she had somewhere to be. I was just standing there, barely holding back laughter. And then, right on cue, the parking enforcement officer pulled up. The woman didn't notice her at first. I couldn't resist, so I leaned in with the biggest grin and repeated her own words back to her. "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." The look on her face was priceless. She screamed some choice words, scrambled back into her car through the passenger side, and threw it into reverse. What happened next was pure chaos. She slammed into the porta potty, knocked it over, then threw the car into drive, and tried to hop the curb to drive along the sidewalk. She got halfway over the curb and got stuck. Meanwhile, her kid was still in the back seat. The officer had seen the whole thing. She walked right up, ordered the woman out of the car, and slapped handcuffs on her as another patrol unit arrived. By the time it was all said and done, she was arrested and charged with reckless driving, destruction of property, child endangerment, and driving on a suspended license. Her car got towed, her kid went home safely with his grandma, and she went off to spend some time in a cell, all because she refused to move her car when asked nicely. That's where this story finishes. What gets me is how quickly she escalated a simple request into a complete disaster. It could have ended with her just pulling forward 30 feet and driving off. But she doubled down at every turn. The timing of the lumber truck and then the officer showing up was almost too perfect, like the universe was setting her up. And that line, "Just unload around me," coming back on her like that, that's the kind of poetic moment you don't forget. Sometimes people really do dig their own hole, and this time she did it in front of everyone. This next story is about a new mother whose husband doubted their baby's paternity, leading to a painful test and family drama. I'm 27, and I've been married to my husband, who's 28, for 2 years. Just 5 weeks ago, I gave birth to our daughter. I thought this would be one of the happiest times of our lives, but instead it quickly turned into something incredibly stressful and painful. When our daughter was born, she came out with the palest blonde hair and these striking blue eyes. My husband and I both have brown hair and brown eyes, so the moment he saw her, he started to spiral. I tried to explain to him that it's common for babies to be born with lighter features that darken as they get older. I even reminded him that genetics can be unpredictable, and sometimes traits skip generations, but he refused to hear it. He demanded a paternity test on the spot. Not only that, he threatened me with divorce if I didn't agree to it. I had just gone through labor, I was exhausted, and now the person I love most was treating me like a stranger he couldn't trust. So I agreed, even though it broke me inside. After we came home from the hospital, instead of being there for me and our newborn, my husband packed up and went to his parents' house. He stayed there for 3 weeks. 3 weeks while I was recovering from childbirth. 3 weeks while I was navigating sleepless nights, sore muscles, and all the emotions that come with having a newborn. Thankfully, my sister stepped in and helped me care for the baby, but the absence of my husband cut deep. During that time, his mom, my mother-in-law, called me. She didn't call to check on me or ask how her granddaughter was doing. Instead, she told me point blank that if the paternity test proved the baby wasn't my husband's, she would do everything in her power to ruin me financially in a divorce. She wanted me taken to the cleaners, as she put it. I remember holding my baby in one arm, listening to that threat, and wondering how my life had turned into this nightmare. Finally, the test results came back. My husband came over so we could open them together. I was sitting on the couch, holding my breath as we looked at the papers. The results confirmed what I had known all along. He was the father. He just stared at the paper, eyes wide, looking mortified. Honestly, the look on his face was so over the top that, despite everything, I couldn't help but laugh. I said, "I told you so," because for weeks I had been living under suspicion while knowing the truth. But my laughter set him off. He snapped out of his shock and turned his anger on me. He started yelling, accusing me of mocking him, and the whole situation escalated until my sister came downstairs. The moment she appeared, he went quiet, as if he didn't want an audience for his outburst. Not long after, he left again. He went straight back to his parents' house to clear his head. A few hours later, I got another call from my mother-in-law. This time, she scolded me for laughing at him, saying I had kicked him while he was down. The next morning, she sent a string of nasty texts repeating the same accusations, that I was cruel, that I disrespected my husband, and that I was in the wrong. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with our newborn, wondering how I became the villain in this story when I've done nothing but tell the truth and care for our child. I've never cheated. I've never given him any reason to doubt me. And yet, here I am, feeling like my husband and his family owe me an apology that I'll probably never get. That's the end of this story. Man, that's rough. It's wild how quickly trust can break down, especially when emotions are running high after something as huge as childbirth. The part that really stood out to me was how she was left alone during those first weeks. That's supposed to be a time when both parents are bonding with the baby. And then having the mother-in-law pile on with threats instead of support? That's just cold. Honestly, I can see why she laughed in that moment. After everything she'd been through, it must have felt like a release when the truth was finally right there in black and white. It's the kind of laugh that comes from frustration, relief, and a little bit of vindication all at once. This next story is about a husband who discovered his wife's out-of-control takeout habit and how it spiraled into something much bigger than he expected. Just 9 days ago, I made a post online about my wife's spending habits. She's unemployed right now, and somehow, within a single month, she had spent $1,176 on delivery apps. To put it lightly, that was way outside what we could reasonably afford. I tried to talk to her about it, but she didn't seem willing to slow down or even acknowledge how bad it was. So I ended up canceling our credit card and transferring the money from our joint account into my personal one just to keep her from draining it further. That's when everything blew up. For the next several days, she kept accusing me of financially abusing her. She would throw tantrums about how unfair I was being, and at one point even threatened divorce. She didn't stop there either. She literally threw out food we already had in the fridge, almost like she was trying to strong-arm me into letting her order takeout again. And then came the wildest part. She tried to guess my bank account password, over and over again. I only found out because my bank sent me an automated email after too many failed login attempts. Imagine sitting there reading that email, realizing your own spouse is trying to break into your account. Then, almost overnight, she seemed to calm down. By Friday, the complaints stopped, the yelling stopped. She was acting normal again, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, she'd finally come to terms with it. For about a week, things felt fine. Until garbage day. I went to take the trash out like usual, And in the last bag I tossed in the bin, I noticed something strange. It was filled with half a dozen fast food bags and takeout containers. Different restaurants, different meals, all in the same week. My stomach just dropped. She wasn't supposed to have access to any money, so how was she paying for it? I confronted her, and of course she denied everything. She said she didn't know what I was talking about, but I had all the evidence right there in my hands. So I laid out the bags in front of her until she finally cracked. That's when she admitted it. She hadn't borrowed money from family or asked a friend for help. No, she had gone to one of those payday loan places. To be clear, I had no idea how she even got approved. But she had been borrowing money just to keep eating out. The fees alone were ridiculous. $20 for every 100 she borrowed. She ended up paying $60 in fees just to keep up her takeout habit. As soon as I found out, I froze my credit. Then I drove her down to the payday loan office myself and paid off the loan in cash. It drained me even further, dipping into my savings just so we could make rent. And the whole time I was standing there, I couldn't stop thinking about how far this had gone. In a way, my plan worked. She wasn't using delivery apps anymore, but instead she was physically driving to restaurants, using borrowed money at insane interest rates. It was beyond irresponsible. It was self-destructive. That was the last straw for me. I told her right then and there that we were getting divorced. Our marriage is over. I don't even know what the alimony laws are like in my state, but at this point, I'm past caring. If she wants to keep living this way, she'll probably be happy in a cardboard box as long as Uber Eats can deliver there. That's where the story ends. That one was tough to hear. It's wild how something like takeout, which seems small at first, can spiral into a full-on breaking point in a marriage. What stuck out to me most was the payday loan part. Those places are brutal, and seeing someone actually go that far just to keep a habit going says a lot. I can imagine the mix of frustration and disbelief he must have felt, pulling fast food bags out of the trash like that. Honestly, it almost feels surreal, like the kind of problem you'd expect in a movie, not real life. This next story is about a man whose mom tried to force him to reconcile with his cheating ex, leading to a dramatic Christmas Eve standoff. Some quick backstory first. I'd been dating my ex-fiancée, Sarah, for about 4 years. We were engaged, and we had even set the date for November of 2020. But earlier this month, everything fell apart when I found out she was cheating on me. She begged me for another chance, but for me, that was the end. I broke it off immediately. The thing is, being cheated on felt humiliating. I didn't want to tell anyone the real reason. I didn't want my family looking at me like I wasn't enough or pitying me for what she did. So when people asked, I never explained. And of course, Sarah wasn't going to tell anyone either, because that would mean admitting what she did. That left the blame sitting on me. To everyone else, it looked like I had just dumped her out of nowhere. Even my own mom believed that, and she wasn't shy about letting me know she thought I was wrong. Meanwhile, Sarah had been talking to my mom behind my back. She convinced her that if the two of us could just sit down together, we could work it out. My mom ran with that idea, and suddenly I had her pressuring me nonstop to talk to Sarah again. I kept telling her there was no chance. None. I didn't want contact. I didn't want closure. I didn't even want to hear her name. But it was like my mom refused to believe me. Fast forward to Christmas Eve. My mom was hosting, and the whole family was there. My aunts, my uncles, cousins, everyone. At first, it was fine. We were catching up, just enjoying the holiday. Then the doorbell rang. I glanced over, and my stomach dropped. It was Sarah. I turned to my mom and asked what the hell was going on. That's when she smiled like it was the most normal thing in the world, and said she had invited Sarah. According to her, it was in the spirit of the holidays, and a perfect chance for us to reconcile. My blood was boiling. The only way to make sense of why I didn't want to see Sarah was to tell everyone that she had cheated on me, and that wasn't something I wanted to do in front of the entire family. The humiliation would have crushed me. So while my mom went to answer the door, I made a decision. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat there as she started knocking and insisting I come out and talk to Sarah like an adult. I didn't say a word back at first. I just stared at the window. Then I thought, screw it. I kicked the screen out, climbed through, and got into my car. Within minutes, I was driving away, leaving the whole situation behind. Not long after, my mom called me, absolutely livid. She said she was cutting ties with me over my behavior. specifically over the window stunt, and that Sarah would always be like a daughter to her, no matter what. A little while later, my sister called too. She yelled at me for ruining Christmas. I broke down and finally told her the truth, that Sarah had cheated on me, and that was why I ended everything, and why I wanted no contact. But instead of understanding, she accused me of lying just to make myself look better. She told me I was the one in the wrong here, and now I'm sitting here questioning myself. That's the end of this story. That was a wild one. I think what hit me the most was how the mom just completely ignored his boundaries and basically blindsided him with his ex on Christmas Eve. Jumping out the bathroom window was definitely a dramatic move, but honestly, I can't even blame him for doing it. It's sad that he didn't feel like he could be honest about the cheating at first. And then when he finally did open up, his own sister didn't even believe him. That part stuck with me, how isolating that must have felt. This next story is about a young man who fell into a complicated relationship without realizing it would later collide with his current life in the most uncomfortable way possible. Let me just start by saying, I don't think I'm the one in the wrong here, but I need to get it off my chest because it's been eating me alive. A couple of years ago, when I was 19, I was working as a personal trainer. That's where I met this woman who was in her 40s, though you never would have guessed it by looking at her. She looked closer to 25. She started showing interest in me, and before long, she invited me out a few times. Things escalated, and eventually we slept together more than once. After one of those meetups, though, she told me it was wrong for someone her age to be with me. She said I was too young, and not long after that, she switched gyms. At the time, I didn't think much about it beyond a mix of excitement and guilt. Fast forward to now. I've been with my girlfriend for just under a year, and I'm absolutely crazy about her. She's amazing, and I genuinely love her. A couple of months ago, I finally met her family for the first time, and that's when my whole world shifted. She took me to her parents' house, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt like I was being pranked. It hit me almost instantly. My girlfriend and her mom share a lot of the same features, the same type I've always been drawn to, and that's when the realization came crashing down. I had hooked up with her mother 2 years earlier. My stomach dropped, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then her parents walked out together, her mom, her dad, standing side by side, smiling, welcoming me into their home. And that's when the full truth really sank in. I hadn't just been messing around with a single mom. I had been a married woman's boy toy without even knowing it. The shame I felt in that moment was overwhelming. Later that week, her mom somehow found my number and reached out to me. She made it very clear. I could never say anything about what happened between us. She told me that if I did, it would destroy everything, and my girlfriend would never forgive me. She said I'd be the one to break up their family. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling trapped and cornered. Now I'm carrying this secret around, and it feels heavier every day. My girlfriend invited me to spend Thanksgiving with her family this year. Normally, that would be something to look forward to, especially since my own family is 1,000 miles away. But now I feel like I've been backed into a corner. I already told her I'm not going home for the holidays, so I don't have an excuse not to go. That means I'm going to be sitting at their dinner table, carving turkey and passing mashed potatoes, right across from the woman I once had an affair with, sitting there with her husband, her daughter, who I now love, and pretending nothing ever happened. I honestly don't know how I'm supposed to handle it. Every part of me is screaming that this is a nightmare waiting to explode, but I can't see a way out. That's where this story ends. Man, that is one of the most uncomfortable positions I've ever heard of. I can't imagine sitting at a family table, carrying a secret like that, and trying to act normal. The tension would be off the charts. Like, every glance across the room would feel loaded. It's one of those situations where just reading it makes you squirm a little, because it feels like a ticking time bomb. This next story is about a woman who discovered her parents took money that was meant for her education and used it for her brother's wedding, leaving her to fight her own family over what was rightfully hers. My great aunt was honestly ahead of her time. In our culture, women's education isn't always given much importance, but she thought that was complete nonsense. She grew up in London with her father, got a proper education, and eventually went on to attend university, becoming a doctor. She married a British man, moved to America, and built a really solid life for herself. With the success she had, she made it her mission to support the women in our family, especially when it came to education. She started setting up savings accounts for all of her female relatives. She wanted to make sure that no matter what the culture around us said, the women in the family would have the chance to pursue school if they wanted to. She even helped fund the education of as many nieces and grandnieces as she possibly could. It was her way of paying it forward, and she kept at it until the very end of her life. When she passed away, she left money behind for every single girl in the family. My sister and I both had accounts set up for us, but when I finally went to access mine, I found out it had basically been drained. Instead of keeping that money safe for me, my parents had taken it and used it to pay for my brother's wedding. My sister wasn't upset about it because she had married young and had no plans to go to college anyway, but I was furious. By the time I graduated and went to the bank, there was only about $13,000 left. That was supposed to be my safety net for school, and instead I had to turn to student loans to cover the rest. When I confronted my parents about it, their answer was basically just that they needed the money. I didn't buy that. Eventually, I learned the full truth, that it went toward my brother's big wedding. The sense of betrayal was heavy. I ended up moving out, and since then, I've carried this reputation in the family as a source of shame. They look at me like I turned my back on them, but honestly, I don't really care anymore. Now I'm suing them for the money that was left for me. I'm not trying to go after them for anything extra, just what was meant for me in the first place. My entire family is against me for it, though. They say I'm putting money ahead of family and making private family business public. My friends are on my side, but most of them are American and don't really understand my family's cultural background. Truthfully, I don't think I fully understand it either, because from my perspective, this just isn't right. To make things even more complicated, my brother called me with an offer. He said he would pay for my university expenses if I dropped the lawsuit. At first, it sounded like a step toward making things right, but I told him I'd only accept it if we made a legally binding contract. He didn't like that. He accused me of being cruel for not trusting him, and all I could think was that he never should have accepted money meant for me in the first place. That trust was broken long before I ever asked for a contract. Now it's become this huge point of embarrassment in the community we come from. People whisper about it, and I can feel the tension every time the subject comes up. Part of me feels ashamed to be dragging this through court, but then I remember the debt hanging over my head. Debt I never should have had if the money had been left alone. That reminder is what keeps me standing firm, even though it feels like the whole family is against me. That's where the story ends. That one feels heavy. Having your own parents take something that was meant for you, and then the whole family turning against you when you stand up for yourself, that's rough. I get why she's conflicted, but honestly, I think anyone in her shoes would feel just as betrayed. It's one thing to lose trust in strangers, but when it's your own family, that cuts a lot deeper. This next story is about a young referee who got fed up with an older ref trying to make up rules and cheat him out of pay, only to flip the situation back on him in a pretty satisfying way. I was 15 when this all went down, and at that time I was working as a soccer referee. Most weekends I'd head out to the fields, sometimes as the center referee, sometimes as an assistant referee, what we usually call an AR. It wasn't glamorous work, but for a 15-year-old, it was solid money and a chance to build some responsibility. Normally, I made it a point to show up about 10 to 15 minutes before any game. That was plenty of time to check in the players, make sure all the equipment and the field itself were good to go, and still have a couple of minutes to get my head straight before kickoff. Nobody had ever given me grief about that. It was more than enough time to do the job right. One day, though, I was scheduled to be an AR, and the center ref that day was an 18-year-old guy I'll call Dave. Right when I arrived, Dave told me that referees were required to show up a full 30 minutes before every game. Now, I'd been doing this long enough to know that was just flat out not true. There was no such rule. But instead of arguing, I just kept quiet and figured I'd go about the day as usual. The match itself was completely normal. Nothing dramatic happened on the field. After it ended, we headed back to where we'd stashed our stuff, and that's when Dave pulled his little stunt. He looked me dead in the eye and said that because I hadn't shown up 30 minutes early, he was going to mark me down as absent. In other words, he was telling me I wouldn't get paid for the very game we had just officiated together. I pushed back right away, telling him there was no such rule. He shrugged it off and left without saying anything else. And in that moment, I realized exactly what he was up to. If I didn't get paid as an AR, that meant the system would show the game as missing an assistant referee. And if the game didn't have an AR, the center ref, Dave, would get paid a little extra, about $5 more per game. He was literally trying to pocket extra cash by stiffing me. I wasn't about to let that slide. When I got home, I pulled up the referee's scheduling system and made a small adjustment of my own. I signed up as the center referee for every single game where Dave had already signed up to be an AR. If he wanted to play games with me, I was going to return the favor, only this time by using his own fake 30 minutes early rule against him. The next match rolled around, and I made sure to watch the clock. Sure enough, Dave showed up about 15 minutes before the game, which was exactly what I used to do. Except now, I stayed silent during the game, and then when reporting attendance, I marked him as absent. That meant he wouldn't get paid for that match. I repeated this every time we worked together. Game after game, Dave kept arriving about 15 minutes early, just like he always had. And every single time, I quietly marked him absent. It went on like that for about a week and a half. By the time his paycheck rolled in, he was short by about $120 compared to what he should have earned. It didn't take long for him to start asking questions. Dave emailed one of the main referees who oversaw everything, let's call him John, to find out what was going on. John checked the system and told Dave that according to the records, he hadn't shown up for multiple games, so naturally he wasn't paid for them. That's when it clicked for Dave. He realized what I had done. The emails started flying back and forth between me, Dave, and John, with Dave trying to plead his case and me calmly explaining the whole story. Eventually, John had all the information in front of him, including the fact that Dave had been making up his own rules to take advantage of me in the first place. The end result? Dave got fired for making up rules and trying to game the system for extra pay. And as for me, I was paid for that very first game where he had tried to cheat me. So yeah, don't underestimate young people. We catch on faster than you think. That's the end of this story. Man, that one made me smile. There's something oddly satisfying about watching someone set up a trap and then fall into the exact same thing they created. The fact that it played out over multiple games makes it even better. Like this slow burn of justice stacking up until payday hit. I like how calm the narrator stayed too. No yelling, no drama, just letting the system do the work. It's one of those stories where patience really paid off. Literally. Anyways, that's everything for today's batch of stories. Hopefully this was a chill listen, whether you followed along or just let it run while doing your own thing. Also, if you have any subreddit suggestions, feel free to leave it in the comments. But if you enjoyed this video, a quick like and subscribe really helps out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.